today's video, I have prepared literally every theory about the Elder Scrolls lore I could find, and we are going to go through all of them. I did a lot of research for this video, so it would be nice if you listened. And without further ado, whether you are listening to this while falling asleep or just in the background while doing something else, enjoy. First theory. Alright, so most people who played Skyrim know the Thalmor as those smug elves who hate Talos, worship, and generally make everyone's life miserable. But what if I told you their plans might be way bigger and way darker than just political domination? We're talking about the complete destruction of reality as we know it. This theory starts with something called the Towers. Now, the Towers aren't just buildings. They're these metaphysical structures scattered across Nirn that basically act like anchors for reality. Think of them like tent poles keeping the fabric of existence from collapsing in on itself. The idea came from this writer named Michael Kirkbride, who used to work at Bethesda. He's not officially employed there anymore, but his ideas have shaped so much of the deeper Elder Scrolls lore that you can't really ignore his stuff. So here's how it works. At the beginning of everything, there was the Adamantine Tower, which the lore calls Adamantia or the Tower. This thing was built by the gods themselves during the Dawn era, back when time didn't even work properly yet. It's located on the Isle of Balfiera in the Iliac Bay, and it's literally the oldest structure in all of Nirn. Everything about creation, about Mundus existing as a stable realm, traces back to this tower. Then the elves started building their own towers, trying to copy what the Aedra did. You've got the Crystal Tower in Somerset, which was one of the first copies. The Altmer built this thing to preserve elder magic, to keep it from changing into something lesser. Then there's White Gold Tower in Cyrodiil, built by the Aelids. Red Mountain in Morrowind, which is actually just a volcano, but the heart of Lorkhan inside it acted as the stone, the power source that made it function as a tower. The Dwemer's Numidium, which we'll get to later, that's called the Brass Tower, or Walk Brass. Greensap in Valenwood, which wasn't even built, the Bosmer grew it from a special acorn. Snowthroat, which is the throat of the world in Skyrim. And there was supposedly an Orichalc Tower in Yokuda that sank with the continent. Each tower has what's called a stone, this thing that acts as its heart and power source. For Adamantia, nobody really knows what the stone is. For Crystal Tower, it was this huge red crystal called Transparent Law that existed in every reality at once. White Gold Tower's stone was the Amulet of Kings, or maybe the Kim El Adabal. Red Mountain stone was literally the heart of Lorkhan. For Numidium, it was the heart at first, then later this thing called the Mantella. Greensap stone was the perchance acorn. For Snowthroat, people think it might be a cave, weirdly enough. Now here's where it gets dark. According to this theory, the Thalmor want to deactivate or destroy all these towers. Why? Because they see mortal existence as a curse, a trap. See, in Altmer mythology, their ancestors were these divine spirits who got tricked by Lorkhan into creating Mundus, the mortal plane. They went from being immortal, timeless beings to being stuck in bodies that age and die. The Thalmor's ultimate goal isn't just to rule Tamriel, it's to undo creation itself, to destabilize Mundus until it dissolves back into the void, so they can return to that original divine state. And here's the scary part, they're already most of the way there. Let's count down what's happened to the towers. Red Mountain's tower was deactivated at the end of Morrowind when you destroy the enchantments on the heart of Lorkhan, and then the mountain literally erupts a few years later. Crystal Tower got wrecked during the Oblivion Crisis. Numidium got destroyed after the warp in the west at the end of Daggerfall. The Orichalc Tower sank with Yokuda ages ago. White Gold Tower lost its stone when Martin Septim shattered the Amulet of Kings to stop Mehrunes Dagon. That's 5 towers down. The status of the others is sketchy. Greensap supposedly lost the ability to move before the events of Oblivion, and now it's under Thalmor control in Valenwood. Snowthroat is described as broken in the Dragonborn prophecy, though what that means exactly is up for debate. The only tower that's definitely still active and intact is Adamantia, the original one in High Rock. So if this theory is right, there's only one tower left standing between the Talmor and their goal of unmaking reality. And where is Adamantia located? Right across the bay from Hammerfell, which is probably where Elder Scrolls 6 is going to be set. Coincidence? Maybe not. Now, you might ask, if the Talmor succeed, won't they just cease to exist along with everything else? And that's where it gets into their religious beliefs. They think they're special enough, pure enough, that they'll survive the dissolution and return to their original divine forms. Whether that's arrogance or whether they actually know something we don't, who can say? But the lore hints that only the highest ranking Talmor even know about this plan. To most people, even most Altmer, the Talmor are just a political faction trying to restore Aldmeris and get revenge on humans. There's this out-of-game text called an Altmeric commentary on Talos that basically says the Talmor's end goal is to return the world to this timeless state of pure spirit. It doesn't spell out the tower plan exactly, but it fits perfectly with what we know about how the towers work. And in Skyrim, you've got that whole situation with the Eye of Magnus, where a Thalmor agent is trying to harness this artifact that's supposedly powerful enough to destroy the world. The College of Winterhold questline has you stop him, but it makes you wonder, was this guy acting alone, or was this part of a bigger Talmor strategy? The thing that makes this theory so compelling is that whether Bethesda originally planned for the towers to work this way or not, they keep coming up in the games. The concept has been around since before Morrowind, with references to Walkbrass and the nature of these structures. Then you've got the prophecy of the Dragonborn that explicitly mentions the Snow Tower being sundered, kingless, bleeding. The pattern is there, the towers keep getting deactivated or destroyed, and the Talmor keep getting more powerful and more bold in their actions. There's debate among lore fans about whether this theory is canon or not, since a lot of it comes from Michael Kirkbride's forum posts and out-of-game writings. But here's the thing, Bethesda keeps incorporating his ideas into the actual games. Elder Scrolls Online has quests that reference the towers, Skyrim has in-game books that talk about them, and the way the main quests have played out across multiple games seems to follow this pattern of towers being deactivated. Whether it's intentional on Bethesda's part or whether they're just following the lore threads that were laid down, the result is the same. And think about the implications. If this theory is true, every major conflict in the Elder Scrolls series, every world-ending threat you've stopped, might have just been clearing the way for the Talmor's real plan. The Oblivion Crisis, which destroyed Crystal Tower. Dagoth Ur's plan to use the Heart of Lorkhan, which ended with Red Mountain's tower being deactivated. The Civil War in Skyrim, potentially weakening Snowthroat. All of it could be part of this bigger cosmic chess game. The counter-argument is that the towers might serve different purposes than just holding reality together. Some texts suggest they were meant to be used actively as sources of power, not just passive anchors. The Staff of Towers, which shows up in Elder Scrolls Online, was allegedly created to harness the power of all the towers. And there's this event called the Middle Dawn Dragon Break, where a group called the Marukati Selectives, basically human religious zealots, used the power of White Gold Tower to literally break time and try to separate the human aspect of Akatosh from the elvish aspect of Auriel. So maybe the Talmor's plan isn't to destroy the towers, but to use the remaining ones to reshape reality in their favor. Either way, the tower theory is probably the most popular fan theory in the Elder Scrolls community, and it's gained so much traction that Bethesda pretty much has to address it in future games. Whether they confirm it, deny it, or leave it ambiguous, Elder Scrolls 6 is going to have to deal with these ideas one way or another. Next up, let's talk about one of the biggest mysteries in all of Elder Scrolls lore. What happened to the Dwemer? These guys, also called dwarves, though they weren't actually short, were the most technologically advanced civilization in Tamriel's history. They built underground cities that still work thousands of years later. They created robots called animanculi that are still wandering around, perfectly functional. And they got really deep into stuff that most people would consider way too dangerous to mess with. The Dwemer lived mostly in what's now Morrowind, in a region they called Dwemereth. They were atheists, which is wild in a world where gods provably exist and regularly mess with mortal affairs. The Dwemer looked at the gods and went, "Nah, we don't worship you. We're going to figure out how this universe actually works and maybe become gods ourselves." That level of arrogance, or confidence, depending on how you look at it, is pretty much the defining trait of the Dwemer. During the First Era, probably around the year 680 or so, the Dwemer discovered something huge. Deep inside Red Mountain, they found the heart of Lorkhan. Now, Lorkhan is this god who convinced or tricked the other gods into creating the mortal world, Mundus. As punishment, or maybe just as a consequence, the other gods ripped out Lorkhan's heart and cast it down to Nirn. It crashed into what would become Vardenfell and created Red Mountain. The Dwemer were led by a guy named Kagrenak, who was their chief tonal architect. Tonal architecture is this Dwemer science based on manipulating the fundamental vibrations of reality, the tones that make up existence itself. It's like if sound and math and magic all merged into one discipline. Kagrenak looked at the heart of Lorkhan and had this idea. What if we could use this thing to make ourselves into gods, or at least to grant the Dwemer eternal life and free them from mortality? So Kagrenak created 3 tools specifically designed to tap into the power of the heart. Keening, which is this short blade, Sunder, which is a hammer, and Raceguard, which is a gauntlet that protects the user from the heart's power burning them to ash. The plan was to build a giant artificial god, a brass construct called Numidium, and use the heart as its power source. Then, somehow, through tonal manipulation and the power flowing through Numidium, the Dwemer would achieve their goal. But there was a problem. The Chimer, who were the ancestors of the modern Dark Elves, were not cool with this plan at all. Their leader, a guy named Nerevar, had an alliance with the Dwemer king Dumak, but when Nerevar found out about the heart experiments, he was like, "This is way too dangerous, you need to stop." The Dwemer refused. War broke out. In the year 700 of the First Era, at the Battle of Red Mountain, things came to a head. The Chimer forces were attacking the Dwemer stronghold. Kagrenak, either out of desperation or because he thought the time was right, used his tools on the heart of Lorkhan. And in that instant, every single Dwemer on the face of Nirn vanished. Not just the ones at Red Mountain, all of them, everywhere, gone in a blink. Their clothes and armor were left behind, sometimes with piles of ash nearby, but the Dwemer themselves just ceased to be. Well, almost all of them. There was one survivor, a guy named Yagrum Bagarn. He's this old, bloated Dwemer you can meet in Morrowind if you play the main quest. He survived because, at the exact moment of the disappearance, he was in a plane of oblivion, outside of Nirn entirely. When he came back, his entire race was gone, and nobody could tell him what happened. By the time you meet him, he's infected with Corprus disease, and his mind is starting to go, but he's still trying to figure out what Kagrenak did. So what actually happened? There are a bunch of theories, and Yagrum himself proposes 2 possibilities. Theory 1. Kagrenak succeeded. He managed to grant the Dwemer eternal life or divinity, but with unforeseen consequences. Maybe they got displaced to some outer realm, another plane of existence. Maybe they transcended physical reality altogether. This theory suggests the Dwemer got what they wanted. They escaped mortality. They just did it in a way that removed them from Nirn entirely. Theory 2. Kagrenak screwed up catastrophically. Maybe he misused the tools, or maybe there was an inherent flaw in his calculations. The result was the utter destruction or displacement of the entire Dwemer race. Not ascension, just oblivion. They could have been scattered across time, erased from existence, or trapped in some terrible fate worse than death. But there's a third theory that's gained a lot of traction, and it comes from a quest in Skyrim. At the College of Winterhold, you can help this guy, Arniel Gain, with an experiment. Arniel is trying to recreate what happened at the Battle of Red Mountain. He gets you to collect pieces of Dwemer metal and tune a soul gem in specific Dwemer locations. Then, at the end of the quest, he takes Keening, the actual dagger from Kagrenak's tools, and strikes this prepared soul gem. Arniel vanishes, just like the Dwemer. But here's the weird part. After he disappears, you can summon his shade as a spell. Arniel's spirit is bound to you, the player, the Dragonborn. He shows up as this ghostly figure, and if you watch him when he's not being used in combat, he wanders around the college looking confused, like he doesn't fully understand what happened to him. This led to a really interesting theory. What if the Dwemer didn't just disappear, but got bound to something? The heart of Lorkhan was inside Numidium, their artificial god. What if, when Kagranat struck the heart, all the Dwemer souls got sucked into Numidium, becoming part of the brass god? They wouldn't be dead, exactly, but they'd be trapped inside their own creation, acting as its fuel or its consciousness. This would explain why Yagrum Bagarn survived. He was literally on a different plane of existence, so he was out of range when whatever happened, happened. It would also explain why Numidium is so terrifyingly powerful when it's activated. You're not just dealing with a big metal robot. You're dealing with a god machine powered by the collective souls of the most technologically advanced civilization in history. There's precedent for this in Elder Scrolls lore. Soul gems work by trapping souls and using them as power sources. The Dwemer were experts at soul gem technology. So the idea that they could accidentally or intentionally trap themselves in what was basically a giant divine soul gem isn't that far-fetched. Some fans take this even further and suggest that the entire Dwemer civilization became a single unified consciousness within Numidium, a gestalt intelligence that exists on a level beyond normal mortality. Another angle on this theory involves dragon breaks. A dragon break is when time itself shatters and multiple contradictory timelines exist simultaneously. The Battle of Red Mountain has all the hallmarks of a dragon break. There are multiple accounts of what happened, who was there, what the order of events was, and all of them are considered equally true. Vivek, one of the tribunal gods, even wrote that he could rewrite his own history during the dragon break, making himself have always been a god even though he originally wasn't. So maybe what happened to the Dwemer was tied to this shattering of time. Maybe in one timeline they succeeded and ascended, in another they were destroyed, in another they got trapped in Numidium, and somehow all these possibilities collapsed into a single result. They're gone. But not in a way that anyone can fully explain or understand. They exist in a state of mythical uncertainty. Their religious implications are huge too. The Dwemer rejected the gods, said they weren't worthy of worship. Then they tried to become gods themselves using Lorkhan's heart, and immediately paid the price. Some people in Tamriel see this as divine punishment, the gods saying, "You tried to play in our league, and this is what happens." Others see it as a scientific accident, a miscalculation in tonal architecture that had catastrophic results. What makes the Dwemer disappearance so haunting is that their works remain. You can explore their ruins in multiple games. Their technology still functions. The Anemunculi, these robot spiders and spheres and centurions, still patrol the halls of cities that have been abandoned for thousands of years. It's like the Dwemer just stepped out for lunch and never came back. Their entire civilization is frozen in time, waiting for people who will never return. The fact that Bethesda has never given us a straight answer about what happened is probably for the best. Some mysteries are more powerful when they stay mysterious. But the evidence points to something involving Numidium, something involving the heart of Lorkhan, and something that happened in that moment when Kagrenak used his tools. Whether it was godhood, destruction, or something stranger, the Dwemer achieved something that removed an entire civilization from reality in an instant. And that's terrifying when you think about it. Alright, buckle up, because we're about to get into probably the most complicated, most meta, most brain-breaking concept in all of Elder Scrolls lore, Kim. It's usually written in all caps because it's technically an Elnofex word, which is like the divine language of the gods, and those are traditionally written in capitals in the lore. Kim is referred to as the secret syllable of royalty, and it's this state of being where you can break free from literally all known laws of reality and reshape existence according to your will. To understand Kim, you need to understand how reality works in the Elder Scrolls universe. At the highest level, there's this thing called the Godhead. The Godhead is basically a sleeping divine consciousness, and everything, all of reality, is this entity's dream. The Orbis, which is the Elder Scrolls universe, Mundus, Oblivion, Aetherius, all of it is the dream of the Godhead. You, me, the gods, the Daedra, everyone and everything is just part of this cosmic dream. Now, achieving Kim means you realize you're in a dream. You become lucid. It's like when you're having a regular dream and suddenly you realize you're dreaming. And in that moment of realization, you can start to control the dream. Kim is that, but applied to reality itself. You understand that you're not real, that you're just part of this grand illusion, this cosmic dream. But here's the catch. Most people, when they achieve that realization, they undergo what's called zero summing. You realize you're not real. You're just a figment of someone else's dream. And that realization is so overwhelming that you cease to exist. You literally blink out of reality, erased by your own enlightenment. It's like the universe does the math. I equals part of the dream. Dream isn't real, therefore I isn't real. Therefore, I equals zero. Gone. To achieve Kim without zero summing, you have to do something that seems impossible. You have to realize you're not real, that you're part of the dream, and then somehow assert that you still exist anyway. You maintain your sense of I in the face of cosmic unreality. The formula is, I are all we. You recognize you're part of the whole, you're part of the Godhead's dream, but you also maintain your individual identity, your ego, your sense of self. Think of it like lucid dreaming. In a lucid dream, you know you're dreaming, but you don't wake up, and you don't disappear from the dream either. You exist in this state where you're aware it's a dream, while simultaneously being a character in that dream, and because you're aware, you can manipulate the dream. You can fly, you can change the scenery, you can do things that would be impossible if you thought the dream was real. Kim works the same way. Once you've achieved it, you can rewrite reality. You can change the past, alter the present, reshape the world according to your will. You're not bound by the normal rules of cause and effect, time and space, life and death. You become, for all intents and purposes, a god, but a god who knows they're a character in a story and can therefore edit the story. According to the lore, only two beings have definitely achieved Kim, Vivec and Talos. Let's talk about Vivec first. Vivec is one of the Tribunal, the three living gods of Morrowind. He achieved both godhood and Kim, which makes him probably one of the most powerful beings in the entire setting. Vivec wrote extensively about Kim in his 36 lessons, these weird, cryptic sermons that are half religious text, half mystical instruction manual. In the sermons, Vivec describes learning about Kim from Molag Bal, the Daedric Prince of Domination. The story goes that Molag Bal taught Vivec the secret syllable of royalty during their complicated relationship. Armed with this knowledge, Vivec achieved Kim. And what did he do with that power? He held up a meteor above his city, Vivec City, for hundreds of years through sheer force of will. The meteor, called Bar Dao, or the Ministry of Truth, was this chunk of rock that Sheogorath threw at Vivec. Vivec caught it, stopped it mid-air, and just kept it there, hovering above the city as a reminder of his power and his love for his people. The thing is, Kim can only be used through love. It's connected to this concept that the Godhead is love, capital L. So Vivec held that meteor up because he loved his people and wanted to protect them. The catch was, he said he'd only keep holding it up as long as the Dunmer worshipped him and loved him back. It was this really messed up hostage situation disguised as divine protection. Eventually, after the events of Morrowind, the Tribunal lost their power. Vivec disappeared, and the meteor fell. It crashed into Vivec City and triggered the eruption of Red Mountain, leading to the Red Year that devastated Vvardenfell, so that worked out great. The other confirmed Kim user is Talos, also known as Tiber Septim. Now, Talos achieving Kim is more controversial in the lore community because the evidence is less direct, but there's one feat attributed to him that pretty much requires Kim to pull off. According to some texts, Cyrodiil used to be a jungle, like tropical rainforest covering the whole province. But Talos didn't like jungles. His soldiers, the Red Legions, hated fighting in the jungle. So Talos, using Kim, retroactively changed Cyrodiil from a jungle into the temperate forest and grassland that you see in Oblivion. He didn't just change the present, he changed history so that Cyrodiil had always been temperate. That's the kind of reality warping power Kim gives you. You can edit the universe like it's a document and you have the Cosmic Administrator password. The text from the Many-Headed Talos has this quote: "You have suffered for me to win this throne, and I see how you hate jungle. Let me show you the power of Talos Stormcrown, born of the north, where my breath is long winter. I breathe now, in royalty, and reshape this land which is mine. I do this for you, Red Legions, for I love you." Again, the love component. Kim requires love, or at least that's how the lore frames it. Whether it's actually love, or whether it's something else that just looks like love from a certain angle, that's up for debate. Now, there's this character named Mike the Liar who shows up in multiple Elder Scrolls games. He's this Khajiit who makes weird fourth wall breaking comments, references things from previous games, and generally acts like he knows more than he should. Some fans theorize that Mike has achieved Kim. The evidence? He appears in Morrowind, Oblivion, Skyrim, and ESO, spanning thousands of years. He makes comments about game mechanics, about things that don't exist in that particular game but did in previous ones. He seems to have knowledge that breaks the normal rules of the setting. Mike says stuff like, Mike's father was also called Mike, as was Mike's father's father, which could just mean it's a family name passed down. Or it could be one Mike who's been around for 1,000 years and is lying about the family lineage. He also says, Mike can't remember his childhood. Perhaps he never had one. That's the kind of thing someone who's transcended normal reality might say. The Mike theory is fun because it suggests that achieving Kim doesn't mean you have to go around flexing your reality warping powers. Maybe Mike achieved Kim and decided the best use of godlike power was to just wander around making weird jokes and confusing people. He knows it's all a game, literally and metaphorically, so why not just enjoy the ride? Whether Mike has Kim or not, he represents something that's core to understanding this concept. Kim is about breaking the fourth wall, about understanding that the Elder Scrolls universe is, in a meta sense, a constructed story. The characters who achieve Kim are recognizing that they're in a game, or a story, or a simulation, whatever metaphor you want to use, and then choosing to exist and act anyway, despite that knowledge. This gets into some heavy philosophical territory. If you knew for certain that your entire reality was just someone else's dream or imagination, how would you react? Would you cease to care about anything? Would you go mad? Would you try to wake the dreamer? Would you try to take control? Kim is about facing that ultimate existential crisis and coming out the other side with your sense of self intact, even enhanced. The path to achieving Kim is described as one of great suffering and violence. Vivek talks about reaching heaven by violence, which has multiple interpretations. It might mean you have to destroy your own preconceptions violently, tear apart your understanding of reality through brutal self-examination. Or it might be more literal, that the process of achieving Kim involves actual violence and trauma that serves as a catalyst for transcendence. There's also the risk of waking the Godhead. If you mess with reality too much, if you make too many drastic changes, you might wake the dreamer, and if the Godhead wakes up, the dream ends, which means all of reality ceases to exist. So people with Kim have to be really careful about how they use their power. It's like being aware you're in someone else's dream and not wanting to startle them awake. Some fans interpret Kim as a joke about the game's console commands or construction kit. If you open up the creation engine and start editing the game world, placing objects wherever you want, changing terrain, giving yourself items, you're essentially achieving Kim within the game world. You're breaking the rules from outside the normal play experience. Vivek's sermons even reference things like the edge of the map, and making sleep holes to rest during time stops, which sound a lot like talking about video game mechanics. Whether that's the intended reading or whether it's a deeper statement about consciousness and reality, Kim remains one of the coolest and most mind-bending concepts in gaming. It turns the entire Elder Scrolls setting into a meditation on existence itself, on what it means to be real, on whether knowing something is an illusion makes it more or less meaningful. And the beauty of it is that Bethesda leaves it deliberately vague. Most in-game characters have never heard of Kim. It's this secret knowledge, this occult understanding, that only shows up in the weirdest, most mystical texts. The average person in Tamriel has no idea that reality is a dream or that transcendence is possible. They live their lives, fight their wars, worship their gods, completely unaware of the true nature of existence, which kind of mirrors our own relationship to these games, right? We play through these stories, get invested in these characters and conflicts, even though on some level we know it's all pixels and code and carefully crafted fiction. But that knowledge doesn't make the experience less meaningful. We choose to engage with the illusion because there's value in the engagement itself. Maybe that's what Kim is really about. Here's a theory that'll make you question everything about how the series is named. What if the Elder Scrolls, those reality-bending, prophetic artifacts that show up in the games, aren't actually the most important thing in the setting? What if the series should actually be called The Towers, but Bethesda went with The Elder Scrolls because it sounds cooler and is way easier to market? Think about it. How often do the Elder Scrolls themselves actually matter to the main plot? In Arena, there are no scrolls at all. In Daggerfall, they mention ancient scrolls, but they're not central to anything. In Morrowind, there are no Elder Scrolls involved in the main quest. In Oblivion, they're referenced, but don't show up. It's not until Skyrim that an Elder Scroll becomes a crucial plot device, and even then, it's more of a plot coupon that lets you look into the past, not the main focus of the story. Meanwhile, the Towers, they're woven into literally every main quest, even when the games don't explicitly call them out. Arena involves the staff that maintains the Imperial Realm. Daggerfall is all about Numidium, the Brass Tower. Morrowind's entire plot revolves around Red Mountain and the heart of Lorkhan, which is the stone of the Red Tower. Oblivion ends with Martin Septim destroying the Amulet of Kings, which is the stone of White Gold Tower, to stop Mehrunes Dagon. And Skyrim is all about the Throat of the World, which is Snowthroat, one of the towers. So you've got this pattern, where every game is secretly about a tower, about these metaphysical structures that hold reality together, even when the games aren't explicitly framing it that way. The main villain in Morrowind, Dagoth-Ur, is trying to tap into the heart of Lorkhan to power a new Numidium. The Oblivion Crisis results in the destruction or deactivation of multiple towers. The civil war in Skyrim takes place around Snowthroat and could potentially be weakening it. This theory suggests that Bethesda chose The Elder Scrolls as the series name because it's more accessible, more marketable, more fantastical sounding than The Towers. But the actual through line of the series, the connecting tissue that links all the games together on a metaphysical level, is this conflict over the towers and what they represent. The Elder Scrolls themselves are weird, don't get me wrong. They're these artifacts that exist outside normal time, that show possible futures and hidden pasts, that can drive people mad or blind if they read them without protection. They're clearly important, but they're more like tools, like plot devices that let characters access special knowledge. The towers are structural, they're about the fundamental nature of reality in this setting. In Skyrim, you use an Elder Scroll to look back in time and learn the Dragonrend Shout. That's cool and useful, but the actual conflict is about Alduin trying to end the world and you trying to stop him at the throat of the world, at Snowthroat. The scroll is a means to an end. The tower is where the real action happens. There's also the fact that Elder Scrolls as objects don't really make sense. Different games describe them differently. Sometimes there's one, sometimes there's many. Sometimes they're physical scrolls, sometimes they're more conceptual. Sometimes reading them shows the future, sometimes the past, sometimes both, sometimes neither. They're intentionally vague and mystical in a way that makes them hard to pin down as a central narrative element. The towers, on the other hand, have this beautiful internal consistency to their mythology. They were created to stabilize reality. Each has a stone that serves as its power source. When a tower is deactivated, it has cosmic consequences. They represent different aspects of creation and different attempts by the mortal races to emulate the gods. That's a solid mythological framework that you can build multiple games around. You could even argue that the series naming is itself an example of what the games are about, the difference between surface-level appearances and deeper truths. Everyone knows the series as The Elder Scrolls, but if you actually dig into the lore, if you pay attention to what's really happening beneath the surface narratives, you discover it's always been about the towers. It's like the series itself has achieved the form of Kim, where the name and the reality don't match, but both exist simultaneously. The Elder Scrolls Online actually makes this more explicit than the single-player games ever did. In ESO, there are multiple storylines dealing with the towers, with characters who understand what they are and what they do. The main quest of the base game involves Molag Bal trying to merge Nirn with his realm of Cold Harbor, which would completely mess up the towers and potentially destroy reality. Later expansions have you dealing with threats to specific towers or exploring the nature of these structures. ESO also introduces the concept of Meridia trying to create her own tower, the Hollow City, in Cold Harbor. This shows that the towers aren't just ancient structures from the Dawn era. They're an ongoing element of the metaphysics. New towers can potentially be created, old ones can be destroyed or repaired. They're active elements in the world, not just historical curiosities. Some fans take this theory further and suggest that each player character in the main games is somehow connected to a tower. The Nerevarine is literally reborn to deal with Red Mountain. The champion of Cyrodiil witnesses the destruction of White Gold Tower Stone. The last Dragonborn operates from Snow Throat. There might be this pattern where the heroes of the series are unconsciously acting as agents of the towers, protecting them or sometimes inadvertently helping to deactivate them. Now, why would Bethesda structure the series this way without making it super obvious? One reason might be that it lets them tell multiple kinds of stories while maintaining this deeper meta-narrative for players who want to dig into the lore. Your average player can enjoy Skyrim as a game about dragons and civil war without ever knowing what Snowthroat is or what the towers represent. But hardcore lore fans can find these deeper patterns and appreciate how everything connects. It also gives the series flexibility. If the games were explicitly called The Towers, and were obviously about the towers in every installment, it would lock Bethesda into a specific narrative trajectory. By keeping it subtle, they can tell whatever stories they want while still maintaining this underlying structure for those who care about it. The counter-argument to this theory is that maybe it's just fans finding patterns where none were intended. Maybe the Towers thing started as an idea in one game and then got retroactively expanded because fans liked it. Bethesda might not have had this grand plan from the beginning. The series has been running since 1994, and a lot has changed in terms of writers, designers, and creative direction over those decades. But even if it wasn't planned from the start, the fact that it's become such a central part of the lore means that Bethesda has to deal with it going forward. They've built this incredible mythological structure, whether intentionally or accidentally, and now it's part of what makes the Elder Scrolls setting unique. The Towers theory has become such a big part of how fans understand the series that ignoring it would be weird. And honestly, whether the Elder Scrolls are more important than the Towers or vice versa, it doesn't really matter. Both concepts add depth to the setting. The scrolls represent knowledge and prophecy, the ability to see beyond normal time. The towers represent structure and stability, the framework that keeps reality functioning. You could argue that both are necessary, that you need both the mystical knowledge represented by the scrolls and the structural stability represented by the towers for the Elder Scrolls universe to work as a setting. Maybe the real answer is that The Elder Scrolls is the perfect title for a series about uncovering hidden knowledge, about digging beneath the surface to find deeper truths. The scrolls themselves might not always be central to the plot, but the act of scrolling, of reading, of discovering hidden lore, that's what the series is about on a meta level. And when you do that digging, when you read all those in-game books and connect all those dots, what you find is the Towers, this incredible underlying mythology that ties everything together. So maybe the title isn't a lie so much as it's an invitation. The Elder Scrolls tells you, hey, there's ancient knowledge here, there are secrets to uncover, there's more going on than meets the eye. And when you accept that invitation and start digging, you find the Towers, you find Kim, you find all these mind-bending concepts that make the series so special. Next up, talk about Numidium, also called the Brass God, the Brass Tower, or Walk Brass. This thing is probably the single most destructive force ever created in the Elder Scrolls universe, and it shows up in one form or another across multiple games and time periods. More than that, Numidium represents this theme of empire, power, and repeating cycles that runs through the entire series. Numidium was originally created by the Dwemer, specifically by Kagrenac and his team of tonal architects. It was meant to be the ultimate achievement of their civilization, a mechanical god powered by the heart of Lorkhan. The idea was to create something that could grant the Dwemer divinity, or at least free them from the constraints of mortality. We already talked about how that worked out for them in the Dwemer section. They vanished, potentially becoming part of Numidium itself. The thing about Numidium is that it's not just a big robot. It's a statement, a philosophical weapon. According to the lore, Numidium has the ability to impose a single truth on reality. That truth is no. Numidium doesn't argue with you, it doesn't debate, it just denies your existence. When Numidium says no, you cease to be. It's the ultimate expression of refutation made manifest. This isn't just metaphorical. When Numidium was activated, it broke time, multiple times. The first major activation happened during the Battle of Red Mountain, and that was probably just a test run or an accident. The real chaos came later, during the warp in the west at the end of Daggerfall. In Daggerfall, multiple factions get access to Numidium, or to the Totem of Tiber Septim, which can control Numidium. Depending on your choices in the game, any of 6 different groups could end up with it. The Kingdoms of Daggerfall, Wayrest or Orsinium, the Underking, the King of Worms, Manimarco, or the Blades on behalf of the Empire. In the canon ending, which is what actually happened in the lore, all of these groups got Numidium at the same time. Because time broke, the warp in the west was a dragon break, one of those moments where time shatters and multiple contradictory realities exist simultaneously. For 2 days in the year 417 of the Third Era, every possible outcome happened at once. All 6 factions used Numidium. Wars were fought and won in timelines that also didn't happen. Kingdoms rose and fell. And when time reassembled itself, the political landscape of High Rock and Hammerfell had completely changed. What's left after the warp is a timeline where Numidium was destroyed, broken down into pieces and scattered, but the damage was done. Time itself had been wounded, reality had been reshaped. And dozens, maybe hundreds of other timelines where things happened differently just got erased or merged together. Numidium shows up again in the backstory of the Empire. Tiber Septim used Numidium to conquer Tamriel. He got it working again somehow, powered by a different soul gem called the Mantella, since the heart of Lorkhan wasn't available. With Numidium, he crushed anyone who opposed him. The Somerset Isles, the homeland of the Altmer, held out the longest, but even they eventually surrendered to the Empire rather than face total annihilation by the Brass God. This is part of why the Thalmor hate Talos so much. It's not just that humans worshipping a human as a god offends their sensibilities. It's that Talos used their own ancestral enemy, the Dwemer's god machine, to conquer their homeland. Numidium represents everything the Thalmor despise. The mortal races trying to become gods, the use of profane technology, the violation of natural order. And Talos took that weapon and used it to humiliate the Altmer, forcing them to submit to human rule. So what's the theme here? What's the deeper meaning of Numidium showing up across multiple games and eras? It's about cycles of power. It's about how empires rise using terrible weapons and how those weapons eventually destroy their wielders. The Dwemer built Numidium and vanished. Tiber Septim used Numidium to build an empire, but that empire eventually fell. Multiple kingdoms in High Rock tried to use Numidium to secure power, and the result was a catastrophic dragon break that changed everything. Numidium is like the One Ring from Lord of the Rings, but way more literal in its destructive power. It's the ultimate weapon that seems like it'll solve all your problems, but using it just creates worse problems. It offers power, but the cost is always higher than you expect. And because it's connected to time breaks and reality warping, Numidium has this recursive quality where it keeps coming back, keeps being reassembled or reactivated, keeps causing disasters. There's also this theory that Numidium represents the Godhead trying to reject its own dream. Remember how we talked about reality being the dream of a sleeping divine consciousness? Numidium's power to deny existence, to say no to reality, might be the dreamer unconsciously trying to end the dream, trying to wake up. Every time Numidium is activated, it's this suicidal impulse from the Godhead made manifest, this desire to stop dreaming and return to void. The Dwemer, in building Numidium, might have created a device that exploits this cosmic vulnerability. They made something that speaks in the language of the Godhead's deepest impulse, the desire for non-existence, for the cessation of the dream. And that's why it's so dangerous. It's not just powerful, it's ontologically threatening. It threatens the very basis of reality. The connection to the towers is obvious. Numidium is itself a tower, the brass tower, or walk brass. But unlike other towers that stabilize reality, Numidium destabilizes it. It's an anti-tower, a structure designed to do the opposite of what towers are supposed to do. While Adamantia and Crystal-like Law and the others act as anchors keeping Mundus coherent, Numidium is this chaotic force that breaks those anchors, that introduces instability and change. And maybe that's necessary. Maybe reality needs both stabilizing forces and destabilizing forces to function. The towers keep everything from flying apart, but Numidium introduces change, prevents stagnation. Without some force of chaos, the dream would never change, never evolve. The Godhead would be locked in the same dream forever. Or maybe that's giving Numidium too much credit. Maybe it's just a weapon, a really terrible weapon that keeps causing disasters because people can't help themselves from trying to use it. The cycle repeats. Someone finds Numidium or builds a new version, someone thinks they can control it, someone uses it for conquest or power, reality breaks a little more, and then eventually it gets destroyed or deactivated until the next person comes along. This ties into themes throughout the Elder Scrolls series about power and corruption. The Dwemer reached too far and paid the price. The tribunal gods maintained power by lying about what happened at Red Mountain and eventually lost everything. The Septim Empire was built on the backs of conquest by Numidium and the Blades, and it collapsed during the Oblivion Crisis. The Talmor are now trying to impose their will on Tamriel, and if the tower theory is right, their plan involves destroying reality itself. Each group thinks they can use or control these cosmic forces for their own ends, and each group eventually fails. The lesson seems to be that you can't control reality. You can't bend the fundamental forces of existence to your will without consequences, but nobody ever learns the lesson. Each generation, each civilization, thinks they'll be different, thinks they're smart enough or powerful enough to succeed where others failed. Numidium embodies that cycle. It keeps coming back because people keep reaching for ultimate power. It keeps being rebuilt or reactivated because someone always thinks they can handle it. And it keeps causing catastrophic damage because its nature is to destroy, to deny, to break things down. In a weird way, Numidium is the most honest of all the towers. The others pretend to be about stability and order and maintaining creation, but they're also tools of power. They're also weapons in their own right. White Gold Tower was used to break time and separate the human and elven aspects of Akatosh. Red Mountain was tapped for power by both the Dwemer and the Tribunal. Even Adamantia was the site of convention, where the gods literally established the rules of reality. Numidium doesn't pretend to be anything other than what it is: a weapon, a statement of power, a force of negation. It's a tower, sure, but it's a tower that says no to everything the other towers represent, and maybe that's its purpose in the mythology. Maybe the Elder Scrolls universe needs that force of negation to balance out all the forces of creation and stability. The fact that Numidium might be powered by the souls of the Dwemer just makes it even more tragic. If that theory is right, then every time Numidium is activated, the Dwemer are forced to participate in the destruction they tried to avoid. They wanted to escape mortality, to become gods, and instead they became the fuel for a god machine that causes suffering and chaos wherever it goes. And the cycle continues. Elder Scrolls 6 is probably going to be set in Hammerfell and High Rock, the exact region where the warp in the west happened, where Numidium was last destroyed. Is it going to come back? Are there still pieces of it scattered around, waiting to be reassembled? Is someone going to try to build a new version? Given the pattern of the series, given the themes of cycles and repetition and empires rising and falling, it seems likely that Numidium or something like it will play a role. Because that's what the Elder Scrolls is about, ultimately. It's about these cycles, these patterns that repeat across ages and eras. The towers keep getting deactivated. Empires keep rising and falling. People keep reaching for power they can't control. Dragon breaks keep happening. And Numidium, whether literally or symbolically, keeps coming back to say no to existence, to deny reality, to break the cycle by breaking everything. Maybe the only way to truly end the cycle is to let it play out, to let Numidium have its final say, to let the towers all fall and reality finally collapse back into the void. Or maybe the cycle is the point. Maybe creation requires this constant tension between order and chaos, between stability and change, between the towers holding reality together and Numidium trying to tear it apart. Either way, Numidium stands as this incredible piece of mythology in the Elder Scrolls universe. It's not just a big robot boss fight, though it is that. It's a symbol of everything the series is exploring: power, mortality, the relationship between mortals and gods, the price of ambition, the nature of reality itself. It's the brass god, the great refuter, the mechanical deity that says no to existence and breaks time trying to prove its point. Alright, so we've covered 5 massive theories here. The Thalmor potentially trying to destroy reality by taking down the towers. The Dwemer disappearing into their own god machine, maybe becoming Numidium's power source. Kim as this state of lucid dreaming in the Godhead's dream, letting beings like Vivek and Talos rewrite reality. The idea that the series is secretly about the towers and not about the Elder Scrolls themselves. And Numidium as this recurring cycle of empire and destruction that keeps playing out across the ages. What connects all of these? They're all about the nature of reality in the Elder Scrolls universe, about what makes things real, about the power to change or end existence. They're all asking the same questions from different angles. What does it mean to exist? Can reality be changed? Should it be? What happens when mortals try to achieve what the gods did? What's the cost of power? The Elder Scrolls series could just be a standard fantasy setting with dragons and magic and different races fighting each other. And on the surface, that's what it is, and there's nothing wrong with enjoying it on that level. But beneath that surface, there's this incredible mythology, this interconnected web of ideas about consciousness and reality and existence that makes the lore feel genuinely profound. Whether Bethesda planned all of this from the beginning, or whether it evolved organically as different writers and designers added to the setting over 30 years, the result is a world that rewards deep engagement. You can play Skyrim and just have fun fighting dragons and exploring dungeons, or you can read all the books, connect all the dots, and discover you're playing a game about the nature of existence itself, where the main villain might be reality trying to end itself, and the player character might be unconsciously acting as an agent of metaphysical forces they don't even understand. That's what makes these theories so compelling. They take what could be throwaway lore, weird books hidden in dungeons, cryptic dialogue from mystical characters, and they weave it into this grand tapestry of meaning. The Thalmor aren't just elven supremacists, they're agents of cosmic dissolution. The Dwemer aren't just a lost civilization, they're a cautionary tale about reaching too far for godhood. Mike the Liar isn't just a joke character, he might be a reality warper who's in on the cosmic joke. And the best part? None of this is explicitly confirmed or denied. Bethesda leaves it all ambiguous enough that you can interpret it however you want. The hardcore lore fans can dig deep and find all these connections, but casual players never have to engage with any of it if they don't want to. It's optional depth, which is the best kind of depth. So yeah, those are 5 Elder Scrolls theories that'll mess with your head if you think about them too much. The Thalmor might be trying to end reality. The Dwemer might be trapped in their own god machine. Kim might let you rewrite existence if you can avoid zero-summing. The series might be secretly about the towers and not the scrolls at all. And Numidium might represent an eternal cycle of power and destruction that spans the entire timeline of the setting. Whether any of this is canon, whether Bethesda will confirm or deny these theories in future games, who knows? But that uncertainty is part of what makes Elder Scrolls lore so fun to dig into. There's always another layer, always another connection to make, always another book to read that might shed light on these cosmic mysteries. And maybe, just maybe, when Elder Scrolls 6 comes out, we'll get some answers. Or, more likely, we'll just get more questions, more cryptic hints, more pieces of this incredible puzzle that is the Elder Scrolls universe. Next up, let's talk about where the game might actually take place. When that teaser trailer dropped back at E3 2018, people immediately started picking apart every single frame. Mountains, coastline, some ruins scattered around. The whole thing lasted like 30 seconds, but that was enough for the entire community to basically turn into geography detectives. The landscape shows a rocky coastline with mountains, suggesting either High Rock or Hammerfell, based on the trailer's geographical features. What we saw was this sweeping camera movement, starting in mist, then clearing up to show mountainous terrain around the coastal valley. There's also what looks like a rune structure sitting on the edge of what might be a crater. The vegetation gets less sparse as you move toward the valley and coast, like we're moving from somewhere really dry to a rockier, semi-forested coastal area. So here's what makes this interesting. People went nuts trying to figure out where this could be. One YouTuber called Camelworks did this incredibly detailed investigation where he started with the sun. Yeah, the sun. He figured out that since shadows were being cast on the left side of the screen, the sun had to be on the right, which means it's setting in the west. From that one detail, he started eliminating provinces. Using the sun's position and geographical analysis, researchers placed the teaser in either northern or southern Hammerfell, near the border with High Rock. But it gets deeper. The trailer shows 3 small peninsulas on a northern coast that match features found in northern Hammerfell. He even found references to a location called Azra's Crossing from an old mobile game, Elder Scrolls Travel's Shadowkey. This place is in northern Hammerfell, right on the border with High Rock, and it was created by a massive crater left behind when a shadow mage named Azra Nightwielder lost control of his powers during a battle with Redguard military and basically exploded. A whole town got built around that crater. The geography lines up pretty well with what we see in the trailer. Enhanced analysis of the trailer suggests the Iliac Bay region between High Rock and Hammerfell as the most likely setting. That bay sits right between these 2 provinces, and it's been a major location before. The whole of Daggerfall, the second Elder Scrolls game, took place in this region back in '96. Having both provinces would make sense for a bunch of reasons. First off, Bethesda loves to one-up themselves with map size. Given Bethesda's pattern of increasing world sizes and the 14-year gap since Skyrim, including both regions would help create an appropriately expansive world. They were super proud that Fallout 76 was 4 times bigger than Fallout 4, and they kept talking about how Skyrim was their biggest handcrafted world. So how do you impress people after Skyrim? Give them 2 whole provinces instead of 1. High Rock is smaller, so combining it with Hammerfell would create this massive, diverse world without feeling overwhelming. There's also the lore angle. Hammerfell separated from the Empire after refusing terms of the White Gold Concordat, while High Rock remained loyal, creating political tension. During the events of Skyrim, which happens in year 201 of the Fourth Era, things were already looking bad. The Empire signed this treaty, called the White Gold Concordat, with the Aldmeri Dominion, basically the Elvish supremacist faction running things in the south. Part of that treaty would have given away portions of Hammerfell's land to the Dominion. The Red Guards said absolutely not, refused to accept it, and broke away from the Empire. They ended up driving the Dominion forces out on their own. High Rock, on the other hand, stayed with the Empire. They're still dealing with their own internal politics, lots of petty kingdoms fighting for power, but they remained loyal. The political situation creates opportunities for conflicts involving the Empire, the independent Hammerfell, and the Talmor threat. This sets up really interesting story possibilities. You've got an independent Hammerfell that just told the Empire and the Dominion to get lost. You've got High Rock trying to stay stable while watching their neighbor go rogue. And you've got the Aldmeri Dominion probably not happy about getting kicked out of Hammerfell. The Iliac Bay itself adds another layer. The bay connecting Hammerfell and High Rock could introduce naval gameplay elements with merchant ships, pirates, and Empire vessels. This is a bustling maritime region with trade routes, pirates, probably some naval military action. Bethesda could do something really cool with sea travel between the two provinces, maybe even some ship combat or underwater exploration. There's an island in the bay called Balfiera that has the Adamantine Tower on it, which is super important to Elder Scrolls lore. We'll get to that later. Now, let's talk about what these provinces actually offer in terms of variety. Hammerfell is the home of the Red Guards, and it's known for having really diverse terrain. Hammerfell features the arid Alik'r Desert in the southwest, alongside forests, jungles, and tropical areas in other regions. You've got the Alik'r Desert in the southwest, which is this treacherous sandy wasteland. But you also have forests, jungles, and tropical paradise areas in other parts. The coastal regions are different from the interior. It's basically the complete opposite of Skyrim's cold, snowy aesthetic. Instead of constantly trudging through snow, you're dealing with baking heat and sandstorms in some areas, lush vegetation in others. High Rock offers something different but still compelling. High Rock features mountainous terrain with snow only in the highest peaks and northeastern areas, despite being at a similar latitude to Skyrim. It's in the northwestern corner of Tamriel, right next to Skyrim actually, but it's not covered in snow everywhere like you might expect. Most of it has this rugged, rocky beauty with mountains, forests, and dramatic coastal areas. The Bretons who live there are half elf, half human, which gives them a natural affinity for magic. Their culture feels more traditionally European fantasy compared to the more North African and Middle Eastern inspired Red Guard culture. The coastline we see in the trailer could totally be High Rock. High Rock's geography includes fertile soil, gray skies, dry weather, and a coastline that matches the trailer footage. It's known for having fertile soil, gray skies, and dry weather. There are lots of castles and fortifications because the region has been constantly fighting over territory. Where there used to be 100 smaller kingdoms, by the Fourth Era there were only 5 left. All that consolidation happened through conflict, which would explain the ruins we see in the trailer. Here's something that makes this dual province theory even more interesting. The former Elder Scrolls lore master Kurt Kuhlman suggested that Black Marsh and Elsewhere are unlikely settings due to accessibility concerns, leaving Hammerfell and High Rock as the most viable options. When Kurt Kuhlman, who used to be the lore master for Elder Scrolls, was asked about future game locations in 2025, he basically ruled out Black Marsh and Elsewhere. His reasoning was that these provinces feature beast races and environments that might be too alien for mainstream appeal. Microsoft owns Bethesda now, and they want games that can reach a wide demographic. That leaves Hammerfell and High Rock as the most logical choices, especially since Skyrim, Morrowind, and Cyrodiil have already been recent settings. Now, there have been some leaks, and you always have to take these with skepticism, but they line up with what we're seeing. Leaked information suggests the game will be titled The Elder Scrolls VI: Hammerfell and feature both Hammerfell and High Rock provinces. One leak from someone called Extas1s claimed the game would be titled Elder Scrolls VI: Hammerfell, but would actually take place in both provinces. The leak mentioned stuff like naval battles, shipbuilding, underwater exploration, islands to discover, and even the return of dragons. Now, whether that's real or just someone making educated guesses based on obvious speculation, who knows? But it tracks with what makes sense for a game of this scope. There's also been this really subtle hint from Bethesda. An etching on a spaceship in the Starfield trailer closely resembles the map outline of High Rock, Iliac Bay, and Hammerfell. In the Starfield reveal trailer, there's this etching on part of the player's ship. When people looked at it closely, it resembled the rough outline of High Rock, Iliac Bay, and Hammerfell on a map. Was that intentional? Bethesda loves hiding Easter eggs and hints, so it's totally possible this was Todd Howard and the team winking at the community. But let's be real about one thing. Elder Scrolls Online already showed us parts of Hammerfell and High Rock. It's set like 1,000 years before the events of the main series games, so yeah, things have changed, but still. The Elder Scrolls Online already depicted parts of these regions, requiring Elder Scrolls 6 to present them as fresh and unexplored. Bethesda needs to make these locations feel new and exciting. They need to give us a version of these places that feels untamed and full of discovery, the same way Skyrim felt when it came out in 2011. That's a tall order, but if anyone can pull it off, it's them. The cultural diversity between the two provinces would be huge for the game. Combining High Rock and Hammerfell would balance accessible human cultures with exotic North African-inspired Redguard traditions rarely seen in fantasy games. High Rock gives you that traditional fantasy kingdom vibe with knights, castles, and magic, while Hammerfell brings this whole different aesthetic inspired by North African and Middle Eastern cultures. That's something we don't see nearly enough in fantasy games. Most fantasy pulls from medieval Europe, so having Redguard culture front and center would be refreshing and unique. Plus, the Redguards have some of the coolest lore in the series, especially when it comes to their sword-singing tradition and their history with Yokuda, their sunken homeland. There's also the orcs to consider. The fourth incarnation of Orsinium, the orc capital, was rebuilt in the Dragontail Mountains between High Rock and Hammerfell in the Fourth Era. Between these two provinces, in the Dragontail Mountains, sits Orsinium. This is the orc capital city, and it's been destroyed and rebuilt multiple times throughout history. The current version, the fourth incarnation, was rebuilt in the Fourth Era after being sacked by forces from both High Rock and Hammerfell. Having Orsinium in the game would add another layer of complexity to the political situation and give us more perspective on orc culture, which has always been interesting but underexplored. The environmental variety alone makes this setting really appealing. In Skyrim, everything kind of had the same cold, Nordic aesthetic. Yeah, there were some regional differences, the volcanic tundra in the southeast versus the snowy mountains in the north, but it mostly felt similar. With Hammerfell and High Rock combined, you could have desert adventures, mountain climbing, coastal exploration, forest dungeons, and naval content all in the same game. That kind of diversity keeps things fresh, over 100+ hour playthrough. There's something else worth mentioning. Both regions offer opportunities to continue storylines from Skyrim, particularly regarding the war with the Aldmeri Dominion. The main story of the next game almost has to deal with the Aldmeri Dominion in some way. The conflict was building throughout Skyrim, and now we're probably going to see it explode in the next game. Hammerfell already fought them off once, and they're probably not done yet. The Thalmor, the extremist faction running the Dominion, have made it pretty clear they see humans as inferior and want to restore Altmer dominance over all of Tamriel. That's a conflict that's been simmering for the entire Fourth Era, and it feels like Elder Scrolls 6 is where we'll finally see it come to a head. One last thing to consider is just how much time has passed. The mainline Elder Scrolls series progresses chronologically with each entry, so Elder Scrolls 6 will likely take place several years or centuries after Skyrim. Elder Scrolls games always move forward in time. Skyrim took place 200 years after Oblivion. If Elder Scrolls 6 follows that pattern, we could be looking at a setting hundreds of years after Skyrim's events. That means the political landscape could be completely different. Maybe the Stormcloak Rebellion succeeded, and Skyrim is independent. Maybe the Empire collapsed entirely. Maybe the Dominion controls half of Tamriel. The time gap gives Bethesda flexibility to craft whatever story they want without being locked into the specific outcomes of player choices in previous games. The trailer might be short and vague, but when you dig into the details, when you look at the geography and the lore and the political situation and just think about what makes sense from a game design perspective, Hammerfell and High Rock really do feel like the obvious choice. It gives Bethesda everything they need for an epic, diverse, politically complex setting that can support a massive open-world RPG. And honestly, after spending so much time in the cold north with Skyrim, the idea of exploring sun-baked deserts and Mediterranean-style coastlines sounds pretty great. Next theory. Now, this one's a bit more out there, but stick with me because it's fascinating. Some theories suggest Elder Scrolls 6 could feature parts of Yokuda, the sunken continent west of Tamriel that was the Redguard's homeland. While most people think the game will be set in Hammerfell or High Rock or both, there's this less mainstream theory that says we might actually visit Yokuda, or at least what's left of it. And yeah, that sounds wild because Yokuda is supposed to be at the bottom of the ocean. But hear me out, because the lore around this place is actually way more complicated and mysterious than you might think. First, let's talk about what Yokuda actually was. Yokuda was a continent west of Tamriel that partially sank into the sea during the First Era, serving as the ancestral home of the Redguards and the extinct left-handed elves. This was a massive continent west of Tamriel, across the Eltharic Ocean. It was the original home of the Yokudans, who would eventually become the Redguards we know today. But it was also home to another race, the left-handed elves, who are now supposedly extinct. The name itself, Yokuda, doesn't have a confirmed meaning, but considering that Tamriel means Dawn's Beauty and Akavir means Dragonland, it probably meant something significant. The continent itself was huge. Before its fall, Yokuda was described as being as large as Akavir, consisting of multiple major islands. Some sources say it was 4 times the size of Tamriel before it fell. It wasn't one solid landmass, but rather a collection of islands, possibly 2 giant main islands with smaller ones scattered around. These islands had names like Akos, Kasaz, Bahia, Kanesh, Kardesh, and others. Because of how far north and south the continent stretched, it had multiple climate zones. The northern parts would have been cold, maybe even frozen like Skyrim, while the southern regions were tropical and warm. That kind of environmental diversity would have created really different cultures and societies across the continent. The Yokudans themselves were pretty incredible. The Yokudan people were originally artisans, poets, mystics, and scholars before constant civil wars led them to seek enlightenment through the way of the sword. Early on, they were known as artisans, poets, mystics, and scholars. But the continent went through centuries of continuous civil war, and that changed everything. People started looking for enlightenment through combat, specifically through what they called the way of the sword. This eventually developed into the tradition of sword singing, which we'll talk more about in the next section. But basically, it was this martial philosophy that became the defining characteristic of Yokudan culture. By the First Era, Yokuda had become a vast empire. Yokuda evolved into a vast empire ruled by emperors, though the imperial system was abolished in 1E 376, leading to 300 years of civil war. They had a tradition of being ruled by a single emperor, but that got abolished in the year 376 of the First Era. After that, the emperor was just a figurehead, and the real power belonged to provincial lords, warrior monks, and basically warlords fighting each other for land and control. These warlords, called Yokeda, built giant stone castles to protect themselves, and towns grew up around those fortifications. It sounds pretty feudal, almost like medieval Japan, and that's intentional because a lot of Yokudan history is inspired by feudal Japanese history. So, where did things go wrong? Well, that's where it gets really interesting and also really unclear. Around 1E 792, Yokuda sank below the sea, with debates ongoing about whether natural disasters, acts of war, or both caused the catastrophe. Around the year 792 of the First Era, the continent sank into the ocean. Most sources agree on that date, but nobody really agrees on why it happened. Some people say it was natural disasters, earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanic eruptions, that kind of thing. Others say it was the result of warfare, specifically something called the War of the Singers, which happened between the Sword Singers and an emperor named Hira, who tried to exterminate them. Here's where it gets really wild. According to lore, a first-rank Ansei Shehai had the power to sink continents by cutting atomos, the theoretical uncuttable particles. There are legends that blame a rebel group of Ansei called the Hiradirge for the destruction. The Ansei were the greatest sword singers, and apparently they had the ability to do things with their spirit swords that were basically apocalyptic. One source claims they could cut the atomos, which is like the fundamental uncuttable particle of reality. Cutting that would cause something like a nuclear explosion or worse. The Celestial Warrior in Elder Scrolls Online even confirms that the Shehai of a first-rank Ansei could have sunk Yokuda. But there's another theory. The Hiradirge may have deliberately sunk Yokuda out of revenge after being defeated in battle. Maybe the Hiradirge, these followers of the last emperor, sank the continent out of spite after losing their war against Frandar Hunding and his sword singers. Either way, something catastrophic happened and most of the continent ended up underwater. That's what forced the Yokudans to flee across the ocean to Tamriel. This migration happened in waves. Beginning in 1E 780, Frandar Hunding led the first migration of the Ragada warrior wave to Hammerfell following the War of the Singers. The first wave was led by Frandar Hunding himself in the year 780 of the First Era. These were the sword singers who had just won their war against the Emperor. They left on a flotilla of ships and crossed the Eltharic Ocean, eventually landing on the western shores of Tamriel. They were called the Ragada, which means warrior wave in their language, and that name eventually got corrupted into Redguard. When they arrived in what would become Hammerfell, they didn't ask permission. They swept across the region in a bloody campaign, conquering the land from the Dwemer ruins that were already there and the native beast folk and human tribes. It was brutal but effective. They claimed the entire province within months. Later waves brought the Yokudan royalty, the Nato Tambu, and other groups. The surviving Yokudans settled in Bolenfell, later known as Hammerfell, with the Ragada conquering the mainland, while royalty followed later. Some stayed on an island called Herne before making it to the mainland. The Redguards brought their culture, their gods, their fighting techniques, everything with them. But they left behind Yokuda, which by then was mostly underwater. Here's the thing though. Yokuda didn't completely disappear. While most of Yokuda sank, island remnants still existed, with some locations like Hatu Mountain reportedly inhabited as late as the mid-Second Era. The lore is actually really unclear about how much of it still exists. Some island remnants survived. During the mid-Second Era, which is when Elder Scrolls Online takes place, there were supposedly still people living in Hatu Mountain in the high desert province of Yokuda. Ships from Anvil in Cyrodiil still sailed to Yokuda as late as the Third Era, which suggests at least some parts of it were still accessible. There's this fascinating book in Elder Scrolls called The Lost Islands of Old Yokuda. The book, The Lost Islands of Old Yokuda, describes Yokuda as an island chain rather than a continent, creating ambiguity about how much actually sank. It describes Yokuda as an island chain rather than a continent, which raises questions about how much actually changed when it sank. Were the islands already separate from a mainland? Did the mainland sink and the islands survive? Or is the sinking still ongoing, slowly pulling more land underwater over centuries? Nobody really knows for sure. That ambiguity is what makes the Yokuda theory so interesting for Elder Scrolls 6. Including Yokuda would allow Bethesda to take players beyond Tamriel for the first time in the mainline series history. If the game is set in Hammerfell, which seems likely, then it makes thematic sense to explore Redguard origins more deeply. Yokuda represents this huge part of Redguard cultural identity. It's their homeland, their lost civilization, the place where all their traditions came from. Having the player actually visit whatever remains of it would be incredibly meaningful from a storytelling perspective. Think about it from a game design angle too. Yokuda could serve as the unexpected element needed to keep the series feeling fresh after the long development time. Elder Scrolls games have always taken place entirely on Tamriel. We've never left the continent in a mainline game. Going to Yokuda, even just partially, would be this huge moment for the series. It would show that Bethesda is willing to take risks and expand the scope of what these games can be. After the massive gap between Skyrim and Elder Scrolls 6, which is looking like it could be 15 years or more, they need something that feels genuinely new and unexpected. Yokuda could be exactly that. There's also the mystery angle. The ambiguous fate of Yokuda leaves room for theories about whether it's truly destroyed, hidden, or possibly faked to trick the Redguards. The fate of Yokuda is deliberately left vague in the lore. What if it didn't actually sink? What if the left-handed elves, who were supposedly wiped out by the Redguards, actually survived by using some kind of magic to hide the continent? What if they tricked the Redguards into abandoning their homeland, outsmarting them where they couldn't defeat them in battle? There are all these possibilities because the lore intentionally doesn't give us definitive answers. Another fascinating angle involves the Yokudan pantheon. Yokuda's unique pantheon of gods, led by Satakal and including deities like Tol Papa and Sep, offers distinct cosmological perspectives rarely explored in the series. The Yokudans had their own gods, completely separate from the 9 divines that most of Tamriel worships. Their chief deity was Satakal, this god of everything who's basically a fusion of Anu and Padome, the 2 primordial forces of the Elder Scrolls universe. Satakal is like the Nordic god Alduin in that he destroys one world to begin the next, over and over in an endless cycle. Then you have Rupka, also called Tol Papa, who was the first spirit to figure out how to survive Satakal's world-eating cycles. He taught other spirits how to do the walkabout, this process of persisting beyond one lifetime. The Yokudan religion is built around these concepts of cycles, destruction, and transcendence. The Yokudan faith centers on Satakal consuming the world to begin another, with spirits learning to survive these transitions. It's very different from the more straightforward pantheons in other parts of Tamriel. Having a game that really explores these gods and their beliefs would add so much depth to the lore. We've dealt with the Aedra and Daedra in every Elder Scrolls game, but the Yokudan gods are barely touched on. If part of Elder Scrolls 6 takes place in or around what's left of Yokuda, we could finally dive into that mythology in a meaningful way. There's also the practical matter of Elder Scrolls Online. Elder Scrolls Online's coverage of Hammerfell and High Rock creates challenges for Elder Scrolls 6 to present fresh content, making Yokuda appealing as unexplored territory. ESO already showed us big chunks of Hammerfell and High Rock. Yeah, it's set way earlier in the timeline, but still, players have already explored a lot of those locations. Bethesda needs something that feels completely new and untouched. Yokuda has never been playable in any Elder Scrolls game. It's only ever been mentioned in books and dialogue. That makes it perfect for Elder Scrolls 6 because it's territory no player has ever seen before. Now, to be realistic, the chances of the entire game being set in Yokuda are pretty low. While dedicating an entire game to Yokuda seems unlikely given the series' tradition of Tamriel-based settings, it could appear in a lesser capacity. The Elder Scrolls series has always been defined by Tamriel, just like Fallout is defined by post-apocalyptic America. Completely abandoning that for a sunken continent would be a huge risk. But Yokuda could still play a major role as a secondary location or as part of an expansion. Bethesda has a history of doing that. In Oblivion, the Shivering Isles DLC took you to Sheogorath's realm in Oblivion, which was completely separate from Tamriel. They could do something similar with Yokuda. Imagine a scenario where the main game takes place in Hammerfell, and then midway through the story, or as part of an expansion, you get the opportunity to travel west across the ocean to explore what's left of Yokuda. A trip to Yokuda could serve as thematic DLC content following Bethesda's pattern of expansions that explore related lore. Maybe you're searching for ancient Ansei secrets, or maybe there's a plot involving the left-handed elves returning, or maybe the Thalmor are trying to find some kind of weapon or artifact from old Yokuda. There are so many narrative possibilities. The ruins alone would be incredible to explore. Yokudan architecture was probably amazing, with massive stone castles, training halls for the sword singers, temples to their gods of war. Sword singers built temples to war gods and training halls called Hall of the Virtues of War for practicing combat skills and sword forging. Imagine diving underwater to explore sunken cities, or sailing between surviving islands and discovering lost knowledge carved into crumbling monuments. The visual design could be so unique compared to anything we've seen in Elder Scrolls before. Where most of Tamriel has this medieval European or Viking aesthetic, Yokuda could draw more from North African, Middle Eastern, and even Japanese influences to create something really distinct. One more thing to consider is that the Red Guards themselves would probably be really invested in any storyline involving Yokuda. The Red Guards maintain strong cultural connections to their Yokudan heritage through traditions, gods, and historical memory despite centuries of separation. For them, it's not just ancient history, it's their cultural heritage, their ancestral homeland. Even though they've been in Hammerfell for thousands of years by the time of Elder Scrolls 6, that connection to Yokuda is still part of their identity. They have memory stones that record thoughts and knowledge, they still worship some of the Yokudan gods, and their entire martial culture comes from the sword-singing traditions that originated on Yokuda. Any questline that took the player to explore these routes would resonate really strongly with the Redguard people and give players insight into one of the most interesting but underexplored cultures in Elder Scrolls. So yeah, the Yokuda theory might seem unlikely at first glance, but when you dig into the lore and think about what would make Elder Scrolls 6 feel truly special and different from past games, it starts making more sense. Even if it's not the main setting, having Yokuda appear in some capacity, whether as an explorable region or as a major plot point, would be a fantastic way to honor Redguard culture and give players something they've never experienced before in an Elder Scrolls game. Alright, next theory. This is where things get really exciting from a gameplay perspective. One of the most popular theories floating around is that Elder Scrolls 6 might replace the tomb, the dragon shouts from Skyrim, with swords singing as the game's signature mechanic. And honestly, when you look at the lore and think about the setting, this makes a ton of sense. Let's start with what sword singing actually is. Sword singers followed the way of the sword, a martial philosophy on blade mastery, with the greatest practitioners becoming Ansei or sword saints. It's this ancient Yokudan martial tradition that goes way beyond just being good with a sword. It's a whole philosophy called the Way of the Sword. The practitioners, called sword singers, spent years strengthening both their bodies and their minds. They were so skilled that their swords literally sang in battle, hence the name. But the greatest among them, the Ansei or sword saints, could do something way more impressive. The Ansei could manifest something called the Shehai, which translates to spirit sword. Ansei warriors could manifest ethereal Shehai spirit swords from their souls through pure force of will. By sheer force of will, they could create this ethereal blade of pure thought that would take shape in their hand. It wasn't a physical object in the traditional sense. It was their soul taking the form of a sword. And because it came from the soul, disarming an Ansei could only be accomplished by severing their head or taking their mind, as the Shehai originated from their essence. You couldn't disarm them by knocking the weapon out of their hand. You'd have to cut off their head or destroy their mind. That's how intrinsic the Shehai was to the Ansei who wielded it. The power of these spirit swords was apparently ridiculous. Sword singers' swords could kill the laws of nature itself, with the most powerful techniques capable of cutting atomos and causing continent-sinking devastation. There's this text where a character named Cyrus says that when sword singers fight, their swords can kill the laws of nature itself. Yokura looks the way it does, he says, because their forbidden swords can cut the atomos, the uncuttable, and they did exactly that. The strongest techniques were apparently capable of causing thermonuclear level destruction. That's the kind of power we're talking about here. Now, the sword singing tradition has basically died out by the time of the later games. By the mid-second era, all Ansei had vanished, and Redguards began believing that the art was lost forever. During the events of Elder Scrolls Online, which takes place in the second era, all the Ansei had already disappeared. The Redguards thought the knowledge was gone, lost with those old masters. By the time of Skyrim, which is in the fourth era, sword singing is basically a legend. There are occasional references to it, and some Redguards still train in traditional sword techniques, but nobody can actually manifest a Shihai anymore. The genuine art has been forgotten. But here's the thing. Just because something is lost doesn't mean it can't be found again. An Ansei named Sai Sahan in Elder Scrolls Online suggested the tradition could return if young warriors followed the way of the sword. In Elder Scrolls Online, there's this character named Sai Sahan, who's basically one of the last people alive who knows anything real about sword singing. He suggests that if young Redguards followed the way of the sword properly, the tradition could come back. The knowledge isn't completely gone, it's just dormant, waiting for someone to rediscover it. That's exactly the kind of narrative hook that would work perfectly for an Elder Scrolls game. You, the player, could be the one who brings back this lost art. Think about how perfectly that mirrors what happened in Skyrim with the Thu'um. Dragon shouts had been lost to the Nords for ages. The Greybeards kept the tradition alive on their mountain, but barely anyone actually knew how to shout anymore. Then you show up as the Dragonborn, and suddenly you can learn shouts by absorbing dragon souls. You bring back this ancient power that had been fading from the world. Elder Scrolls 6 could do the exact same thing with sword singing. Maybe at the start of the game you're just a regular person, but through the main quest you discover you have a natural talent for it, or maybe you find ancient training texts from old Yokuda, or perhaps you meet a surviving master who teaches you. However it happens, you become the person who revives this legendary tradition. That would fit perfectly with the Elder Scrolls tradition of making the player character this prophesized hero who brings back lost knowledge and changes the course of history. From a gameplay perspective, replacing shouts with sword singing would make so much sense. The Tomb was intimately connected to Skyrim's story through dragons and Nordic heritage, making sword singing a natural replacement for a Hammerfell-focused narrative. Dragon shouts worked in Skyrim because the whole game was about dragons returning and the player being Dragonborn. That was the entire identity of that game. But you can't just copy-paste that system into Elder Scrolls 6 without it feeling forced. What would be the justification? Why would a game set in Hammerfell and High Rock revolve around dragon shouts? It wouldn't make thematic sense. Sword singing, though? That's perfect for a game centered on Redguard culture. It's their thing. It's what makes them unique. And mechanically, it could work really similarly to how shouts worked while still feeling fresh and different. Instead of shouting words of power, you'd be executing special sword techniques that manifest as spirit energy. The more you practice and the more you learn, the more powerful techniques you unlock. You could even have a similar cooldown system, where after using powerful technique, you need time before you can use it again. The progression system writes itself. Sword singing's lore-friendly progression system through mastering forms and philosophies could replace the dragon soul absorption mechanic from Skyrim. In Skyrim, you got more powerful shouts by absorbing dragon souls and finding word walls. For sword singing, you could gain power by studying under masters, finding ancient training scrolls, proving yourself in combat trials, or even making pilgrimages to sacred sites. Each new technique you learn could be tied to understanding a deeper aspect of the Way of the Sword philosophy. That would give the progression more narrative weight than just killing dragons and absorbing their souls. There's also room for way more variety than shouts offered. Dragon shouts were cool, but they were pretty limited in terms of what they could do. You had maybe 20 different shouts, and while some were useful, a lot of people ended up just spamming Fusroda and ignoring the rest. Sword singing could be way more diverse because it's not just about one single power source. Different schools of sword singing could emphasize different aspects of combat. Imagine having different styles you could specialize in. Sword singing could include varied techniques like defensive forms for blocking, aggressive strikes, movement abilities, and utility powers for exploration. Maybe one style focuses on pure offense, letting you do massive damage with devastating cuts that channel your spirit energy. Another style could be defensive, creating barriers of force or parrying attacks with perfect timing. You could have movement techniques that let you dash through enemies or leap across gaps. There could even be utility applications, like using your Shihai to cut through barriers that block your path or to reveal hidden secrets. The visual design alone would be incredible. Instead of shouting and having some visual effect happen, you'd see this glowing, ethereal blade appear in your hand or overlay your physical weapon. Different techniques could have different colors or patterns of energy. A Master Ansei's Shihai could be this brilliant, almost blinding light, while someone just learning might have a flickering, unstable spirit sword. The progression from novice to master could be shown visually through how solid and powerful your Shihai appears. There's also a ton of lore to draw from about the different grades of sword singers. Sword singing had multiple ranks. Guardian Ansei mastered all sword techniques. Saint Ansei were virtuosos who innovated new forms, and Yokudan lords used politics rather than swords. The lowest level would be regular sword singers, who have learned the basics but can't manifest a Shihai yet. Above them would be the Guardian Ansei, who had mastered all existing sword techniques. Then you had the Saint Ansei, who were so skilled they could create entirely new techniques that didn't exist before. At the very top were the first rank Ansei, the absolute masters who could do things like cut the Atomos and cause apocalyptic destruction. That ranking system would be perfect for a skill tree or progression path. You start as a novice, learning basic techniques. As you improve, you become a Guardian Ansei, gaining access to advanced techniques passed down through history. Eventually, you reach Saint Ansei status, where you can create your own custom techniques by combining different aspects of what you've learned. And if you fully master the art, you become a first-rank Ansei capable of reality warping sword strikes. That final tier could be your late-game, overpowered abilities that feel amazing to use but require serious investment to unlock. Here's something else that's really cool about sword singing from a gameplay perspective. Frandar Hunding taught that mastering the sword required understanding the 38 grips, the 230 offensive stances, and the 60 methods of dual sword combat. It's not just about magic or destiny, it's about skill, discipline, and knowledge. Frandar Hunding, who's basically the legendary founder of the sword singing tradition, wrote a whole book called the Book of Circles. In it, he described learning the 38 grips, the 230 offensive stances, the 18 defensive positions, the 60 methods of dual sword combat, and more. The point is that sword singing is as much about technical mastery as it is about spiritual power. That could translate into really engaging gameplay. Sword singing's emphasis on technical skill and knowledge would translate well into complex combat mechanics requiring player mastery. Instead of just pressing a button and watching a cool animation, sword singing could require actual player skill. Maybe you need to execute specific input combinations to perform advanced techniques. Maybe timing your strikes perfectly enhances the power of your Shihai. Maybe chaining together different forms in sequence creates devastating combo attacks. This would appeal to players who want deeper, more skill-based combat compared to what we got in Skyrim. And this doesn't mean they'd have to completely abandon magic or other combat styles. Sword singing would just be the signature mechanic, the thing that defines this game the way shouts define Skyrim. You could still play as a mage or an archer or whatever you want, but if you choose to pursue the path of the sword singer, you'd have this unique progression system that no other character build has access to. That creates replay value, because players would want to experience that content. Just like how many people played through Skyrim multiple times specifically to experience the main quest as a Dragonborn. There's also the Shihai Shen Shi Ru, also called the Way of the Spirit Sword. The Shihai Shen Shi Ru, or Way of the Spirit Sword, represented an alternative path requiring both sword singing mastery and external magic. This was like an evolution of standard sword singing that incorporated external magic rather than just drawing on internal willpower. While traditional Ansei rejected the use of outside magic, viewing it as a crutch, the Shihai Shen Shiru practitioners learned to combine both. This could be a really cool option for players who want to play a spell sword or battle mage type character. They could pursue this hybrid path that blends sword singing with traditional magic. From a story perspective, bringing back sword singing creates great opportunities for conflict and drama. Maybe there are traditionalists who don't want the art revived because of what happened to Yokuda. After all, sword singers might have been responsible for sinking an entire continent. Maybe there's a faction that sees sword singing as dangerous and tries to stop you from learning it. Or maybe the Aldmeri Dominion sees your growing power as a threat and actively works to suppress the return of the Ansei before Hammerfell becomes even harder to conquer. You could also have a storyline where you're not the only one rediscovering sword singing. Maybe there are other characters on the same path, and you're competing with them or working alongside them. Some might use their newfound power responsibly, while others might become corrupted by it and pursue the forbidden techniques that destroyed Yokuda. That creates moral complexity and gives players choices about which traditions to preserve and which to leave buried in the past. The connection to Redguard culture would make everything feel more grounded and meaningful. Dragon shouts in Skyrim were cool, but they didn't really say much about Nord culture beyond they learned it from dragons. Sword singing, though, tells you everything about what Redguards value. It shows their emphasis on martial skill, discipline, spiritual strength, and the warrior's path. By engaging with sword singing as a system, you'd be engaging with the heart of what makes Redguards who they are. There's also the question of how sword singing could interact with other gameplay systems. Sword singing could enhance both melee combat and offer creative applications in exploration, puzzle solving, and narrative choices. What if certain doors or barriers can only be opened by striking them with a Shihai? What if there are puzzles that require cutting through specific objects or materials that normal weapons can't affect? What if some quests can be solved differently if you're a sword singer, giving you dialogue options or quest solutions that other characters don't have access to? This would make sword singing feel integrated into the game world rather than just being a combat gimmick. The training itself could be a whole gameplay loop. Maybe you need to seek out masters across Hammerfell who each teach you different aspects of the art. One master lives in the Leaker Desert and teaches you aggressive techniques. Another dwells in the mountains and focuses on defensive forms. A third might be in a coastal city, specializing in fluid, adaptive styles. You travel around the game world specifically to find these teachers, complete their trials, and earn their knowledge. That turns sword singing into more than just a skill tree you level up. It becomes a journey of self-improvement and cultural understanding. And imagine the boss fights you could have against other sword singers. Sword singing could enable epic duels against rival Ansei or corrupted practitioners as major boss encounters. Fighting someone who has the same abilities as you, trying to outmaneuver them, counter their techniques, and prove your mastery is superior. That's way more interesting than just fighting another dragon or a big monster. You're facing someone who knows everything you know, who's trained just as hard, and who's trying to beat you at your own game. Those fights could be incredibly intense and memorable. One last thing to mention is that sword singing isn't just a Redguard thing anymore, at least not potentially. In Elder Scrolls Online, the Celestial Warrior used a corrupted form of sword singing called the Way of the Sword Saints, suggesting knowledge might spread. The Celestial Warrior, one of the main antagonists in ESO, used a corrupted version called the Way of the Sword Saints. He wasn't a Redguard, but he had learned sword singing techniques anyway. This shows that the knowledge can spread beyond its original culture if someone is determined enough to learn it. That could justify the player character, who might not be a Redguard, being able to learn these techniques. You'd have to work harder for it, prove yourself more thoroughly, but it would be possible. Replacing dragon shouts with sword singing would accomplish everything Bethesda needs to do with Elder Scrolls 6. It would create a signature mechanic that feels unique to this game. It would tie directly into the setting and culture in a meaningful way. It would offer deep, skill-based gameplay for players who want that, while still being accessible enough for casual players. And it would honor one of the coolest pieces of Elder Scrolls lore that's been sitting in the background for decades without ever being properly explored in gameplay. If they pull this off, sword singing could be just as iconic for Elder Scrolls 6 as shouts were for Skyrim. Next theory. Now we're getting into the really deep lore, the kind of stuff that makes Elder Scrolls cosmology both fascinating and kind of terrifying. There's this theory that's been building for years that Elder Scrolls 6 is going to deal with the towers, these metaphysical structures that literally hold reality together. And if the theory is right, we might be approaching the endgame of a storyline that's been developing across multiple games and even Elder Scrolls Online. Let's start with what the towers actually are. The towers are metaphysical structures serving as focal points for reality across Nirn, created during the Dawn era by gods and later races. They're not just buildings, even though some of them appear as physical structures, they're cosmic anchors that stabilize reality itself. According to the lore, when the world of Nirn was created back in the Dawn era, it was chaotic and unstable. Time didn't flow normally. The laws of physics were more like suggestions. The Aedra, the gods who sacrificed themselves to create the mortal world, needed a way to stabilize everything and make reality actually function. So they created the first tower, Adamantia, which is also called the Adamantine Tower or the Dureni Tower. Adamantia, the first tower, was built by the Aedra as convention, the place where linear time was established and Lorkhan was judged for creating Nirn. This happened at an event called Convention, where the gods met to judge Lorkhan for tricking them into creating the mortal world. This is when linear time began. Before Convention, time was weird and non-linear. After Convention, the timeline we understand started moving forward. Adamantia wasn't just the first tower, it was the prototype, the original anchor that everything else was based on. After Adamantia came other towers. Each tower had a stone, which was basically the power source or focal point that kept it active. The stones of the towers were varied. Adamantia held 0 stone, Red Tower contained the heart of Lorkhan, and White Gold Tower stone was the Kimeladabal. Adamantia's stone was called 0 stone or the heart of Lorkhan in some texts, though there's confusion about whether those are the same thing. The Red Tower, which is Red Mountain in Morrowind, had the actual physical heart of Lorkhan as its stone until the events of Morrowind when the Nerevarine destroyed it. White Gold Tower in Cyrodiil had the Kimel Adabal, also called the Amulet of Kings, as its stone. Each tower was unique, but they all served the same basic purpose of keeping reality stable. Here's the really important part. The towers don't just sit there looking pretty. They actively maintain the barriers between Mundus, the mortal world, and Oblivion, the realm of the Daedra. Towers maintain reality's stability by creating barriers between Mundus and Oblivion while preventing complete chaos in the mortal realm. Without the towers, those barriers would break down. Daedric princes could freely enter the mortal world without needing anchors or special conditions. Time and space might stop working properly. Reality itself might start falling apart or reverting back to the chaotic state it was in before Convention. And here's where things get concerning. Most of the towers are already gone. Red Tower fell when the heart of Lorkhan was destroyed in the Elder Scrolls 3, Morrowind, causing Red Mountain to erupt. In Morrowind, the Nerevarine destroyed the heart of Lorkhan to defeat Dagoth-Ur. That killed Red Tower. Red Mountain erupted, causing massive devastation across Morrowind. That was in the year 427 of the Third Era. Then, in Oblivion, which happened 6 years later in 433 of the Third Era, Martin Septim shatters the Amulet of Kings to stop Mehrunes Dagon. White Gold Tower fell during the Oblivion Crisis when Martin Septim shattered the Amulet of Kings, though the tower itself remained standing. that killed White Gold Tower. The physical structure is still there in the Imperial City, but it's not functioning as a tower anymore. During the Skyrim Civil War questline, whichever side wins will eventually take control of the city of Solitude or Windhelm, and there's implications about what happens to the Snowthroat Tower. Snowthroat Tower's fate depends on player choices in Skyrim Civil War, with its stone potentially being the cave or related to the Civil War outcome. Snowthroat is another name for the Throat of the World, the highest mountain in Skyrim. Its stone has never been definitively identified, but some theories say it's a cave, specifically the one where you confront Alduin. Others think it's tied to the Civil War and whether Skyrim remains unified. If that tower falls too, that's another one down. Then you've got some towers, whose status is unclear, but probably gone. Crystal Tower on Somerset Isle was destroyed in 4E22, but then rebuilt in Elder Scrolls Online, creating timeline confusion about its status. Crystal Lake Law, which is the Crystal Tower on Somerset Isle, was destroyed during an event called the Oblivion Crisis. The Daedric Prince Mehrunes Dagon shattered it. But then in Elder Scrolls Online, which takes place way earlier in the timeline, you actually rebuild Crystal Tower after it gets damaged. So is it functioning or not by the time of Elder Scrolls 6? Nobody knows for sure, but given that ESO is set in the past, the destruction probably still stands. There are also towers that might still be active. The ones we know about include Green Sap, which is a tower made from a living tree in Valenwood. Orichalk Tower was supposedly in Yokuda, but since Yokuda sank, the tower is probably destroyed or at least deactivated. Wogbrass, which is the Numidium, the giant robot that the Dwemer tried to build. Its status is complicated, because the thing technically exists but also doesn't at the same time due to time travel shenanigans. And of course, Adamantia, the original tower, which as far as we know is still standing on the Isle of Balfiera in the Iliac Bay. Now, here's where the theory gets really intense. Some people believe there's one final tower that nobody has managed to destroy yet, and the main plot of Elder Scrolls 6 is going to revolve around either protecting it or dealing with the consequences of it falling. The Almere Dominion, specifically the Talmor faction, have a stated goal of unmaking creation itself. The Talmor's ultimate goal involves deactivating all towers to unmake creation and return to a pre-mortal divine state. They believe that mortality is a prison and that the creation of Nirn was a mistake. Their ideology says that elves were once divine beings, and they want to return to that state by undoing reality itself. How do you unmake reality? You take down the towers. If all the towers fall, reality becomes unstable enough that it might collapse entirely or revert to the chaos before convention. The barriers between Mundus and Oblivion would fail. Time might stop being linear. The whole structure of existence could fall apart, and for the Thalmor, that's the goal. They want to achieve Amarant, a state of divine transcendence where they escape the mortal world entirely and basically become gods themselves. This isn't just fan speculation. There's actual in-game text supporting this. A book called The Towers appeared in Elder Scrolls Online and in some of the main series games. The Talmor's plan might be reflected in their banning of Talos worship, as Talos potentially represents a tower or stone. It talks about how the towers maintain reality and what might happen if they fall. There are also multiple references throughout the series to the Thalmor wanting to end the world as we know it, not just conquer it. Banning Talos worship, which was one of the main issues in Skyrim, might tie into this. Some theories suggest Talos himself, the divine form of Tiber Septim, is actually a tower or a stone. By erasing belief in Talos, the Thalmor might be trying to deactivate whatever cosmic function he serves. The thing is, the towers have been falling throughout the series, but nobody in the games really talks about it directly. Most characters have no idea what the towers are or why they matter. The series has been systematically deactivating towers across multiple games without explicitly acknowledging it, setting up Elder Scrolls 6 as potential conclusion. It's been this background element building up over decades of real-world time. Players who pay close attention to the lore have noticed the pattern, but the games themselves don't make it a central plot point. That's part of what makes this theory so compelling. Elder Scrolls 6 could be where Bethesda finally brings this storyline to the forefront and makes it the main conflict. So, what would this actually look like in the game? One possibility is that the plot revolves around Adamantia. Adamantia's location in the Iliac Bay makes it a logical focal point if Elder Scrolls 6 is set in High Rock and Hammerfell. If the game takes place in High Rock and Hammerfell, then Adamantia is right there in the Iliac Bay. It's on the Isle of Balfiera, which sits between the two provinces. If Adamantia is the last tower, or one of the last towers still functioning, then protecting it from the Thalmor would be a natural central conflict. Maybe the Aldmeri Dominion launches a major offensive to capture the island and destroy the tower. You'd have to rally forces from both Hammerfell and High Rock, probably work with what's left of the Empire too, to defend reality itself from being unmade. Alternatively, maybe Adamantia has already fallen by the time the game starts, and you're dealing with the consequences. Without the towers stabilizing reality, strange things start happening. Time becomes unreliable. Daedric incursions become more frequent. The boundaries between dream and reality blur. The whole game could have this apocalyptic feeling, where reality is breaking down and you're racing to find some solution before everything collapses completely. There's also the possibility that the plot involves rebuilding or reactivating a tower. If Elder Scrolls 6 involves rebuilding or reactivating a tower, it would parallel ESO's Crystal Tower storyline, while offering hope for reality's preservation. In Elder Scrolls Online, you actually rebuild Crystal Tower after it gets damaged. Maybe Elder Scrolls 6 does something similar. Maybe you discover that one of the fallen towers can be restored, but it requires gathering incredibly powerful artifacts or performing dangerous rituals. The Thalmor would obviously try to stop you, because the last thing they want is the towers being reinforced. The Numidium, Wokbrass, is particularly interesting in all of this. Wokbrass, or the Numidium, represents a potential wildcard, as it's a tower created by mortals with reality-altering capabilities. It's a tower that was created by mortals, specifically the Dwemer, rather than by gods, and its power is ridiculous. When activated, the Numidium can basically say no to reality and make it true. It refutes the existence of things, causing them to cease existing. The Dwemer were trying to use it to achieve godhood, but they vanished before they could complete it. Later, Tiber Septim used it to conquer Tamriel through a combination of military might and reality warping. If someone in Elder Scrolls 6 manages to reactivate the Numidium, all bets are off. That thing could destroy the remaining towers instantly, or it could be used to stabilize reality, or it could just go completely out of control and start erasing everything. Another angle is that Greensap, the tower in Valenwood, becomes crucial. Valenwood is the homeland of the Bosmer, who are part of the Aldmeri Dominion, but many Bosmer don't necessarily agree with the Thalmor's extremism. If the plot involves protecting or reaching Greensap, you might have to navigate Bosmer politics and potentially cause a split in the Dominion itself. Maybe some Bosmer factions realize that the Thalmor are trying to destroy reality and decide to side with the player against their own government. The connection to Elder Scrolls Online is important here. ESO's storyline has dealt heavily with the towers and with threats to reality. Several ESO storylines explore towers and reality-threatening crises, potentially setting up themes Elder Scrolls 6 will conclude. The main story involves Molag Bal trying to merge Nirn with his realm of Cold Harbor, which would have completely destroyed the mortal world. Other storylines deal with Daedric princes trying to exploit weakness in reality's barriers. The game establishes that threats to the towers and to reality itself are serious, recurring dangers. Elder Scrolls 6 could be where all of that comes to a head. Here's something that would make the tower storyline really impactful. Imagine if the game actually lets you choose whether to save reality or let it fall. The Thalmor aren't presented as obviously evil. They genuinely believe they're liberating their people from the prison of mortality. Maybe you can choose to preserve reality or let the Thalmor succeed echoing the moral complexity of previous games. What if you get far enough into their philosophy that you start to understand where they're coming from? What if there's a path where you side with them and help bring down the last tower, accepting that existence as we know it will end, but believing that something better might emerge from the chaos? That would be an incredibly dark option, but it would give players a genuinely difficult moral choice rather than just good guys versus bad guys. Or maybe the choice is more complicated. Maybe saving the towers requires doing something terrible, like sacrificing thousands of lives or making a pact with a Daedric prince. Maybe letting them fall doesn't immediately destroy everything, but instead creates a new reality with different rules. The game could explore the idea that change, even catastrophic change, isn't necessarily pure evil. That would fit with the Elder Scrolls tradition of philosophical complexity, where there aren't easy answers. The visual and gameplay possibilities are huge too. If reality is breaking down, you could have areas of the map where weird things happen. Time loops where you repeat the same events over and over until you figure out how to break the cycle. Zones where the laws of physics don't work normally, so you can walk on walls or fly or experience other strange effects. Places where oblivion is bleeding through into Nirn, creating these hybrid nightmare regions. That would make the game feel genuinely strange and otherworldly in ways that previous Elder Scrolls games haven't quite achieved. Boss fights could involve facing Thalmor leaders who are trying to unmake the towers, or maybe Daedric princes who are taking advantage of reality's instability to invade Nirn. Fighting an opponent while reality is actively falling apart around you could create some incredible set-piece moments. And the final confrontation, whether it's defending the last tower or making the choice about what to do with it, would be this massive climactic moment that determines the fate of existence itself. There's also the meta-narrative angle. The Elder Scrolls series has always been building towards something. Each game advances the timeline and shows reality becoming more unstable. Bringing the Tower storyline to conclusion would provide series-defining narrative closure while determining the future direction of Mundus. Morrowind dealt with a divine disease and the heart of a dead god. Oblivion was about closing gates to hell and stopping an invasion. Skyrim was about dragons returning and civil war. Each game raises the stakes and deals with more cosmic threats. What's bigger than all of that? The potential end of reality itself. That's the ultimate escalation, the final boss, the biggest possible stakes Bethesda could present. If Elder Scrolls 6 actually commits to the Tower storyline, it would transform what seemed like background lore into the central narrative of the entire series. It would recontextualize everything that happened in previous games as building toward this moment. And it would give longtime fans who've been following the lore for years this massive payoff where all those obscure books and cryptic references finally matter in a concrete, game-defining way. Whether the game ends with reality being saved, transformed, or destroyed, it would be one of the most ambitious narrative moves in RPG history. And that's exactly the kind of bold storytelling that could make Elder Scrolls 6 live up to the impossible expectations surrounding it. Next theory. When the Dragonborn finally dies, there might be an epic cosmic war for their soul. Think about it. By the time you reach the endgame in Skyrim, your character has essentially made deals with practically everyone who matters in the supernatural hierarchy. You've become champion to multiple Daedric princes, absorbed dragon souls left and right, and basically walked around collecting divine claims to your soul like they're trading cards. Players speculated there would be a war over the Dragonborn's soul, and when you actually think through the list, it gets pretty wild. You've got Nocturnal claiming you because of the Thieves Guild Nightingale Pact. If you became a werewolf, Hircine wants you for his hunting grounds. Hermaeus Mora definitely has a claim after what went down in the Dragonborn DLC. He basically says you're his servant after defeating Miraak. Then there's potentially Molag Bal if you completed his quest, or any of the other Daedric princes you helped out. And that's just the Daedra side of things. On the flip side, you've got the Aedra, especially Akatosh. The Dragonborn has the soul and blood of a dragon granted by Akatosh, making them essentially Akatosh's creation. The entire reason Dragonborns exist is because Akatosh made them to fight Alduin. So there's this massive question. When you die, who actually gets you? Here's where it gets really interesting. Dragon souls are too large for Daedra to claim, and dragons cannot be soul trapped. There's this whole discussion about whether Daedric princes can even absorb dragon souls at all. When you think about it, regular soul gems can't contain a dragon's essence. They're just too powerful. So if your soul is literally a dragon soul, can the Daedric princes even claim it in the first place? Maybe all these pacts and promises they made with you are completely meaningless because they physically cannot take what they're owed. Some people think Akatosh would just override everyone else. Akatosh's power is absolute, and he has the entire pantheon of the 9 divines on his side. The Daedric princes can complain all they want, but if Akatosh says the Dragonborn belongs to him, then that's that. After all, Alduin was supposed to be stronger than the Daedric princes, and you absorbed his soul along with countless others. That kind of power doesn't just disappear when you die. But then there's another theory that's even cooler. What if you don't go to anyone? Some believe the Dragonborn could ascend to become the 10th divine, similar to how Tiber Septim became Talos. You defeated the War Leader, saved all of reality from being consumed, and absorbed enough souls to potentially rival the gods themselves. The Dragonborn might just ascend to godhood on their own, making all these claims irrelevant because you'd be on the same level as the beings trying to claim you. Or maybe, and this is darker, you absorbed so many souls that you've become something else entirely. You've got pieces of hundreds of dragons inside you, mortal souls from enemies you've killed, possibly Daedric artifacts affecting your essence. When the Dragonborn dies, maybe what's left isn't really a single soul anymore. It's this amalgamation of everything you've absorbed. That could make you completely unclaimed by anyone, because you're not really mortal or divine or Daedric. You're something new. The game never gives us a clear answer, which honestly makes it better. Bethesda has been asked about this for years and has not answered it. But if you follow the logic, the most likely scenario seems to be that either Akatosh takes you by default since you're literally made from his power, or you become powerful enough through all those absorbed souls that you transcend the whole system. The Daedric princes love making deals, but they might have bitten off more than they can chew with the last Dragonborn. Think about Alduin's reaction when you fight him in Sovngarde. He's genuinely surprised that you're there, that a mere mortal could challenge him in his own domain. That's because you're not really a mortal anymore by that point. Every dragon you kill, every soul you absorb makes you more like them and less like a regular person. So when death finally comes, maybe the Dragonborn doesn't experience it like normal mortals do. Maybe dragon souls don't follow the same rules as human souls. After all, when you kill a dragon, their soul goes straight to you. Unless another dragon eats it first, there's no afterlife for them, no Sovngarde, no Oblivion Realm. They just cease or get absorbed. The war for your soul might not even be a fight. It could be that the moment you die, all these entities show up to claim you and realize they can't. The soul is too big, too powerful, too fundamentally different from what they expected. Or maybe there is a massive battle, with Daedric princes manifesting in reality, the divines taking physical form for the first time in ages, all fighting over this one mortal who managed to kill a god and save the world. Some fans even connect this to the next Elder Scrolls game. If the Dragonborn does ascend to become the 10th divine, that could have massive implications for future games. The worship of Talos is already illegal in Skyrim because of the White Gold Concordat. Imagine if another god ascends, how would the Talmor react? Would there be temples to the Dragonborn in the next game? Would people pray to you? The really unsettling part is thinking about the servants of all these entities. Multiple Daedric princes claim your soul in Skyrim, including Nocturnal, Hircine, and Hermaeus Mora. What happens to their other servants when they realize their master is going to war over one soul? Do the other Nightingales lose Nocturnal's favor because she's distracted fighting for you? Do Hircine's werewolves suddenly find themselves less blessed because he's too busy trying to drag you to the hunting grounds? And let's not forget Sithis if you join the Dark Brotherhood. That's not even a Daedric prince, that's the Void itself. Sithis created all of the Daedra and Aedra, making it more powerful than basically everything else. If the Night Mother's binding means your soul belongs to Sithis, then everyone else might as well give up. You can't fight the literal embodiment of nothingness and change. The whole situation is like a cosmic legal battle where everyone has a legitimate claim, but the prize might be impossible to actually collect. You signed contracts with beings who don't understand that you're not a normal mortal. You absorb powers that were never meant for a living being, and now, when the bill comes due, reality itself might not know what to do with you. Maybe that's the scariest part. Not that all these powerful beings want your soul, but that your soul has become something so strange and powerful that the normal rules don't apply anymore. The Dragonborn might be the first being in Elder Scrolls history who truly doesn't fit into any category. Not mortal, not dragon, not Daedra, not divine. Just something unique and unprecedented, created by accident through a combination of ancient blessings and absorbing way too much power. Next theory. What if the Dwemer aren't actually gone? What if they're trapped inside their own machines, forced to experience existence as the automatons that still guard their ruins thousands of years later? When you explore any Dwemer ruin in Skyrim, you always find these mechanical spiders, spheres, and centurions still patrolling, still attacking intruders, still seemingly following their original programming. But here's the thing, they shouldn't still be working. The Dwemer disappeared overnight during the Battle of Red Mountain in the First Era, around 700 years ago in Skyrim's timeline. Their entire civilization vanished in an instant when their chief tonal architect, Kagrenak, used his tools on the heart of Lorkhan. Every single Dwemer across all of Tamriel disappeared at the exact same moment. 1 second they were there, the next they were gone. Except for Yagrum Bagarn, who was in a different plane of oblivion at the time and came back to find his entire race had vanished. But the machines kept running. The lights stayed on in the ruins. The security systems continued to function perfectly. Dwemer automatons nearly always drop a soul gem upon being defeated, and that's not random loot for the player's benefit. That's a huge clue about how these things actually work. Think about what soul gems do. They trap and contain souls to power magical enchantments. Every single automaton has one. The tiny spiders have smaller gems, the spheres have better ones, and the massive centurions contain grand soul gems or special dynamo cores. The size of the soul gem scales with the complexity and power of the machine. There is evidence souls are involved in granting Dwemer automaton sentience based on the Master of the Mind perk, allowing illusion spells to work on them. That's weird, right? Illusion magic affects minds. It manipulates consciousness, emotions, thoughts. Why would it work on a machine unless that machine has some kind of consciousness? The spell shouldn't do anything to a purely mechanical construct. But it does work, which means these automatons have something resembling a mind. Watch how they behave when you enter a ruin. They don't just blindly attack like machines, following simple programming. They coordinate, they take cover, they change tactics based on what you do. The spheres roll around obstacles and flank you. The spiders swarm. The centurions use both melee and ranged attacks depending on distance. The constructs exhibit real-time processing and interaction with reactions based on input stimulus, far beyond what simple mechanical programming could achieve, especially with Dwemer-era technology. So here's the theory. When Kagrenak used his tools on the heart of Lorkhan, something went catastrophically wrong. The Dwemer were trying to create their own god, Numidium, also called the Brass God or Walk Brass. They wanted to achieve divinity through technology and tonal architecture, to transcend their mortal forms and become something greater. But instead of ascending, their souls got scattered. And where did those souls end up? In the very machines they'd built to serve them. Some theorize Dwemer souls inhabit the automatons found in ruins, rather than being gone forever. Think about how horrible that would be. You're a Dwemer engineer, working on your latest invention, and suddenly you're ripped out of your body and shoved into the chassis of a mechanical spider. No hands to create with, no voice to speak with, just an endless existence following whatever programming was installed. You can't die because you're already technically dead. You can't leave because your soul is bound to the machine. You can just patrol the same hallways for thousands of years, attacking anyone who enters, trapped in a metallic prison of your own creation. The evidence gets darker when you think about the different types of automatons. The spiders are simple, basic. Maybe those have the souls of children or less skilled Dwemer. The spheres are more complex, perhaps craftsmen or soldiers. And the centurions, those massive steam-powered giants, a centurion might have the soul of a fallen warrior in battle imbued within its soul gem, an honor to be resurrected in such a form. Maybe that was actually part of Dwemer culture, having your soul transferred to a construct after death so you could continue serving your people forever. But if that's true, it means the Dwemer were already practicing this soul transfer technology before they vanished. They'd perfected the ability to trap souls and use them to power their machines, to give them intelligence and awareness. So when Kagranak's ritual backfired, the same technology that powered their automatons grabbed every Dwemer soul in existence and bound them. There's another detail that supports this. The automatons in Skyrim are different from the ones in Morrowind. Morrowind's Dwemer automatons shut down when taken a certain distance from Vardenfell, and they do not drop soul gems. That suggests the Morrowind automatons were controlled remotely, powered by some central source. But in Skyrim, they're self-contained. Each one has its own power source, its own soul gem. Maybe in Skyrim, the Dwemer had already advanced their technology further, creating truly autonomous constructs powered by individual souls. Now imagine being one of those souls. You were part of the most advanced civilization in Tamriel's history. You build machines that would outlast empires, delved deeper than any other race, uncovered secrets of reality itself. And your reward for all that knowledge and skill was to be trapped in a metal body, attacking adventurers for eternity. You can't even warn them. You can't tell them what happened. You just shoot lightning or swing your hammer and watch them destroy your prison body, releasing you temporarily before you're bound to another automaton that someone activates later. The really messed up part? You can summon Dwemer automatons using certain spells and items. The Conjure Dwemer automaton spell is not actually a summon, but rather a method to build the automaton from conjured parts and power it for a limited time. You're temporarily creating a prison and stuffing a Dwemer soul into it, forcing them to fight for you, then letting them dissipate when the spell ends. Those souls are still out there, floating in whatever realm they got banished to, and we're dragging them back to serve as attack dogs. Think about the tragedy of it. The Dwemer achieved so much, they built cities that survived thousands of years, created technology that still functions perfectly, discovered ways to manipulate the fundamental forces of reality. They were atheists in a world where gods literally walk among mortals. They rejected the Daedra, rejected the Aedra, and tried to become gods themselves through pure science and engineering. And for their hubris, they got turned into the very machines they built to serve them. Every time you enter a Dwemer ruin and fight your way through, you're killing them again. Or maybe not killing, maybe just destroying their current bodies, forcing their souls to wait until some other adventurer activates another automaton they can be bound to. An eternal cycle of imprisonment, brief violent conflict, destruction, and re-imprisonment. Some fans have noticed that certain automatons seem to patrol areas that would have been important in life. A centurion standing guard outside what used to be a treasury. Spiders near what might have been a workshop. Spheres rolling through what look like residential areas. Maybe some tiny part of their original purpose survived the transfer. Maybe they remember, in some dim way, what they used to do when they had flesh instead of brass. The Dwemer were so proud of their technological achievements. They mocked the Snow Elves for worshipping the Daedra. Snow Elves recorded the Dwemer mocked their worship of the Daedra and preferred instead their gods of reason and logic. They enslaved the Falmer, poisoned them, transformed them into the twisted creatures you find in ruins today. And in the end, the Dwemer suffered a fate arguably worse than the Falmer. The Falmer, at least, have bodies, can reproduce, can die naturally. The Dwemer became immortal slaves to their own creations, conscious but powerless, existing but not truly alive. The soul gems you loot from them might be their only chance at freedom. When you take that gem away from the ruin, you're breaking the cycle for that one soul. Maybe that's merciful, removing them from the location where they can be automatically bound to the next automaton that powers up. Or maybe you're trapping them in the gem forever, which is even worse. You ever notice how Dwemer ruins never feel completely dead? The machinery still runs, steam still vents from pipes, lights still glow even after thousands of years. That's because the place is full of souls, all of them aware, all of them trapped. Every cog that turns, every piston that pumps might have a Dwemer soul powering it. The whole ruin could be one massive prison containing an entire civilization, all of them screaming silently in their metal bodies, unable to die, unable to escape, unable to do anything but continue their programmed functions until someone puts them down. And the worst part? Nobody knows for sure. The Dwemer's knowledge disappeared with them. The secrets of how their automatons work, how the soul binding functions, whether those really are Dwemer souls or just captured souls of other creatures, it all went with them. We'll probably never know if every time we explore a Dwemer ruin, we're walking through the twisted remains of an entire civilization still experiencing the consequences of their greatest mistake. Next theory. What if Paarthurnax is actually using you? What if the wise old dragon sitting on his mountain isn't the reformed, peaceful mentor he claims to be, but a calculating manipulator who just played the long game to get rid of his brother and seize power for himself? Paarthurnax's name literally translates from dragon language to ambition overlord cruelty. That's not the name of a peaceful philosopher. The name Paarthurnax means ambition, overlord, cruelty in dragon tongue. Dragon names in Elder Scrolls aren't just labels, they describe the essence of what that dragon is. Alduin means destroyer, devour, master. Every dragon's name reveals their nature. So why does the supposedly reformed dragon who teaches peace and meditation have a name that screams ambitious, cruel ruler? Let's trace back what actually happened. During the Dragon War, Paarthurnax served as Alduin's lieutenant during the Dragon War, during which he committed countless atrocities against the human race. He wasn't just following orders, he was Alduin's right hand, his most trusted commander. For years, maybe centuries, Paarthurnax helped Alduin enslave humanity. The dragon cult, the worship and sacrifice, the absolute domination of mortals, Paarthurnax was actively involved in all of it. Then suddenly, he switches sides. He teaches humans the Tuam, helps them create Dragonrend, and becomes instrumental in Alduin's first defeat. The official story is that he was inspired by Kain, or that he was disgusted by Alduin claiming to be a god. But here's another way to look at it. Paarthurnax saw an opportunity to take power from his brother. Think about the timing. Alduin was at the height of his power, ruling as a god over mortals. He had the dragon cult, had other dragons serving him, had complete control. And where was Paarthurnax in that hierarchy? Second place. Always the lieutenant, never the leader. Paarthurnax and Alduin were supposedly close allies, and Paarthurnax counted Alduin as a brother. But in dragon society, there's always a clear hierarchy. The strongest rules, and Alduin was unquestionably the strongest. So Paarthurnax betrays him. He doesn't face Alduin directly, that would be suicide. Instead, he empowers the mortals, gives them the one weapon that can actually hurt dragons, Dragonrend. Dragonrend was the first doom created solely by mortals, and it forces a dragon to experience mortality. No dragon can learn it because they can't comprehend death. It's the perfect weapon against Alduin, and Paarthurnax hands it to humanity on a silver platter. Alduin gets defeated, banished forward in time. And who's left? Paarthurnax, now positioned as humanity's friend and teacher. He retreats to the throat of the world, establishes the Greybeards, teaches them the way of the voice. He becomes this revered figure, the Grand Master of an order dedicated to a philosophy he invented. Paarthurnax meditated on the pacifist teachings of the way of the voice developed by Jürgen Windcaller and made himself essential to Nordic culture and religion. Fast forward to Skyrim. Alduin returns, and Paarthurnax immediately seeks out the Dragonborn. He teaches you, helps you, guides you toward confronting Alduin. Paarthurnax assists the Dragonborn by teaching them about Chouds, including the Dragon Rend. He's helpful, wise, philosophical. He even questions your motives, asks you why you want to stop Alduin, makes you think about whether ending the world is really such a bad thing. But notice what he doesn't do. He doesn't fight Alduin himself. Even when Alduin attacks at the throat of the world, Paarthurnax helps, sure, but the Dragonborn does the real work. Paarthurnax makes sure you kill Alduin while he keeps his claws clean. And once Alduin is dead, truly dead this time, who's the most powerful dragon left? Paarthurnax. If Paarthurnax is not killed, he appears for a speech in the epilogue, expressing his intent to bring the way of the voice to all dragons. He says he'll teach the other dragons to follow his philosophy, to be peaceful. But let's think about what that actually means. Paarthurnax, the only dragon who can speak to both humans and dragons effectively, becomes the sole authority figure for all of dragonkind. Every dragon that Alduin resurrected now answers to Paarthurnax. He's building an empire wrapped in philosophy and peace. The Blades see through this. Delphine thinks Paarthurnax's betrayal of Alduin makes him worse because it means he could betray the Dragonborn as well. They want him dead because they understand that a dragon who betrayed his own brother, his own leader, for power would absolutely do it again. The fact that he's patient, that he waited thousands of years, doesn't make him trustworthy. It makes him terrifying. Think about his philosophical discussions with you. He questions everything, makes you wonder if defeating Alduin is right, asks about destiny versus choice. When the Dragonborn says it's their destiny to stop Alduin, Paarthurnax questions whether destiny aligns with what is right. He's planting seeds of doubt even as he helps you. Maybe he's testing you, seeing if you are smart enough to question him, seeing if you will be a threat later. And here's the thing about dragons that Paarthurnax himself tells you. Domination isn't their nature. Paarthurnax states that the will to power is in dragons' blood, and all dragons have an innate desire to dominate. He admits he fights this urge constantly through meditation. But urges don't go away just because you meditate on them. An alcoholic who quits drinking is still an alcoholic, they just don't drink. Paarthurnax is still a dragon who wants power. He's just found a different way to get it. Look at what he's built. The Greybeards worship him, consider him their master. He's completely isolated on the throat of the world, where nobody can challenge him or question him. He controls who learns the Thu'um and how they learn it. He's positioned himself as the gatekeeper to power, the one who decides what's acceptable use of the voice and what isn't. That's not humility, that's control. When Alduin returns, Paarthurnax has been sitting on that mountain for thousands of years. Thousands of years of patience, of waiting, of preparing. And the moment his brother comes back, Paarthurnax has the perfect weapon ready, you, the Dragonborn. Paarthurnax convinced dragons to betray Alduin twice, first in the Dragon War and now again with the Dragonborn. That's not luck, that's planning. Some theorize Paarthurnax wanted to unite dragons under his rule from the start, and used the Dragonborn just to get rid of Alduin. Once Alduin is gone, there's no one left to challenge Paarthurnax. The Dragonborn is mortal and will eventually die, but Paarthurnax is immortal. He can wait however long it takes. And when the Dragonborn is dead, he'll still be there, still teaching dragons his philosophy, still building his influence. The really clever part is that his philosophy, the way of the voice, actually benefits him perfectly. It teaches that the Thu'um should only be used for worship and meditation, not for combat or conquest. So all these newly revived dragons, ones who remember the Dragon War, ones who lived for domination and violence, they're supposed to just give that up and follow Paarthurnax's teachings. And if they don't, well, Paarthurnax is the strongest dragon left, and unlike them, he knows Dragon Rend indirectly through you. After Alduin's death, Paarthurnax will have dragons under his command, becoming a better ruler than Alduin. He's smarter than his brother. Alduin ruled through fear and strength, and it got him defeated twice. Paarthurnax rules through wisdom and philosophy, making it look like he's not ruling at all. But he is. Every dragon who comes to learn from him, every Greybeard who serves him, every Nord who respects the way of the voice, they're all part of his power structure. The Dragonborn won't live forever. Paarthurnax knows this. The Dragonborn won't live forever, and after death there will be an era where Paarthurnax can do as he pleases. He just has to wait. And once you're gone, once the only being capable of challenging him is dead, what's to stop Paarthurnax from dropping the act? What's to stop him from deciding that actually dragons should rule after all, just more wisely than Alduin did? You ever notice he never actually apologizes? He admits to his past crimes, acknowledges that he committed atrocities, but there's no remorse. He questions whether he can be trusted, admits the Blades are wise not to trust him, but he doesn't seem bothered by it. Paarthurnax says he would not trust another dragon, and it is always wise to mistrust a dragon. He's telling you directly that trusting him is foolish, but he does it in such a philosophical way that it sounds like wisdom instead of a warning. Maybe the most ambitious thing Paarthurnax ever did was convince everyone he wasn't ambitious. He took a name that means ambition overlord cruelty and made people think he'd overcome it, when really he just learned to be patient. He betrayed the most powerful dragon in existence, helped defeat him, waited thousands of years, and then did it again. And now he's positioned himself as the wise mentor, the peaceful sage, when really he's just won the long game. The game gives you the choice to kill him or not, but think about what happens either way. If you kill him, the dragons lose their teacher and might go back to being monsters. If you let him live, he continues building his influence over dragonkind. Either way, there's no happy ending, just different flavors of bad. Maybe that's the point. Maybe Paarthurnax set it up so that killing him makes things worse, ensuring his survival by making himself necessary. And the saddest part, even if this theory is true, even if Paarthurnax is manipulating everyone and using the Dragonborn as a weapon to eliminate his competition, we'll probably never know for sure. He's too smart to reveal his true intentions. He's had thousands of years to perfect his deception. All we can do is look at his actions, his name, his history of betrayal, and wonder if the wise old dragon on the mountain is actually the most dangerous dragon of all. Next theory. Remember Narfi, the tragic mentally ill beggar living in his ruined house across the river from Ivarstead? The guy whose sister Rhaeda disappeared, leaving him broken and alone? Well, there's a theory about what happened to Rhaeda, and it involves Narfi being a werebear who accidentally killed his own sister. This theory connects to Norse mythology, which Skyrim draws heavily from. In the poetic Edda poem Lokasenna, Narfi is one of Loki's sons and can turn into a wolf. The game's Narfi might be a werebear instead of a werewolf, and there's some interesting evidence for this. First, listen to some of Narfi's dialogue. He says things like, "No more sleep, no, no, no." And oh Rhaeda, you are high in the clouds now, high, 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 just like the moon. Narfi says, if you see Rhaeda, tell her that Narfi misses her and to come home soon, very soon. Soon, soon, like the moon. The moon references are interesting because lycanthropy is connected to moon phases in a lot of folklore. Maybe Narfi can't sleep because he's terrified of what he might do if he transforms. When you investigate Rhaeda's disappearance, you find her skeletal remains underwater near a bridge, not far from Ivarstead. Near Rhaeda's body are floating iron arrows, suggesting she may have been shot. But here's the thing. If she was just shot by bandits or hunters, why is she in the water? Why isn't her body somewhere more obvious? The location suggests something dragged her there, or she fell while fleeing from something. Wilhelm suggests Narfi might be a werewolf based on his behavior, and Wilhelm doesn't want Narfi's anger to bleed through into his transformation. Wilhelm, the innkeeper, is the only person in Ivarstead who acknowledges Narfi exists. Everyone else completely ignores him, walking past his ruined home without comment. That's weird for a small town where everyone knows everyone, unless they're all terrified of him for a reason they don't talk about. Think about Narfi's family history. He mentions saying goodbye to his mother and father with this weird phrasing. With father I said goodbye. With mother I said goodbye. Rhaeda leaves, and Narfi can't say goodbye. His words about his parents' death could imply he saw them die, but there's also something darker there. His house is burned down, a ruin. How did that happen? Did Narfi lose control one night and destroy his own home, possibly killing his parents in the process? Now, here's where the werebear angle comes in. Skyrim has bears everywhere, and they're some of the most dangerous common enemies in the game. But werebears aren't featured as prominently as werewolves. There's no werebear faction, no werebear questline. Maybe that's intentional. Maybe werebears are rarer, more isolated, more tragic figures than werewolves, who have Hircine's hunting grounds and the companions. What if Narfi is a werebear who doesn't have full control over his transformations? He lives alone across the river, separated from the town. His sister used to go gathering ingredients on that small island. Rhaeda would gather ingredients from the small island in the river east of Ivarstead, staying close but not too close to Narfi. Maybe she knew something was wrong with him and was trying to gather supplies to help, possibly to make a cure or something to keep him calm. But one night, maybe during a full moon or a particularly stressful time, Narfi transforms. He doesn't remember it happening. That's part of the curse. In his bear form, driven by animal instinct, he attacks the closest person. That person is Rhaeda. She tries to run, maybe fires some arrows at him, explaining the arrows near her body, but a werebear is fast and strong. He catches her, kills her, and in his beast mind drags or chases her near the river, where she ends up in the water. When Narfi wakes up the next day, he's back in human form, with no memory of what happened. All he knows is Rhaeda is gone. He doesn't connect his transformations to her disappearance because he doesn't remember transforming. He just knows his sister left and never came back, and it broke something in his mind. The trauma of losing everyone, his parents, his sister, combined with the curse of lycanthropy, shattered his sanity. This explains why Wilhelm is so wary of him. Wilhelm might suspect what Narfi is, might have seen signs or heard stories. It explains why the townspeople avoid him so completely. In a small town, rumors spread fast. If people suspect Narfi had something to do with Rhaeda's disappearance, even if they don't know about the lycanthropy, they'd avoid him. And then there's the Dark Brotherhood quest. Someone puts out a contract on Narfi's life. The Dark Brotherhood quest, The Gift, sends you to kill Narfi based on an anonymous contract. Who would want to kill a harmless beggar? Unless he's not harmless. Maybe someone in Ivarstead knows what he is and decided the only way to protect the town is to have him killed. Or maybe, and this is darker, Narfi himself found a way to contact the Dark Brotherhood and arranged his own death because part of him knows what he did and can't live with it. Pay attention to how Narfi acts when you tell him Rhaeda is dead. He doesn't seem surprised. He goes through the motions of grief, but there's something off about it, like part of him already knew. Oh, Rhaeda is dead then? You are sure, yes? Oh, Rhaeda. Narfi is so sorry. His response is almost mechanical, like he's been preparing for this news without realizing why. The timing of Rhaeda's disappearance matters too. It happened about a year before the game starts. That's recent enough that her body hasn't fully decomposed, recent enough that Narfi is still in acute grief. A year isn't that long for someone to be missing. Why is everyone so certain she's not coming back? Unless they know something happened that makes her return impossible. Some people think the werebear theory is too elaborate, that Rhaeda just drowned or was killed by regular bandits. But that doesn't explain the details. The arrows near her body suggest a struggle. The location in the water suggests something unusual. Narfi's strange behavior, his obsession with the moon, his inability to sleep, his exile from normal society, all of it points to something more than just grief. And what about the fact that Skyrim barely features werebears compared to werewolves? There's a random encounter where a hunter transforms into a werebear and attacks you, showing they exist in Skyrim, but there's no werebear community, no faction. Maybe that's because werebears are failures, people who got infected but can't control it, who don't have the pack structure that werewolves have with the companions. Narfi would be one of these failures, alone, uncontrolled, dangerous, without meaning to be. Think about what it means if this theory is true. Narfi is living in constant confusion and grief, mourning a sister he loved, not knowing that his own curse is what killed her. Every day he waits for her to come home, talks about how she's gathering ingredients and will be back soon. He's trapped in a delusion because the truth that he killed her while transformed is too horrible to accept, so his broken mind won't let him remember or connect the pieces. When you complete the quest and tell him his sister is dead, you're not giving him closure. You're confirming what some buried part of him already knew. And if you accept the Dark Brotherhood contract to kill him after that, maybe you're actually doing him a mercy. He's been living in a nightmare of his own creation, literally and figuratively. Death might be the only peace he'll ever get. The whole situation is a tragedy on multiple levels. A family destroyed, possibly by Narfi's curse, a sister who tried to help her brother and paid with her life, a town that turned its back on someone who needed help, and a broken man living in ruins, waiting for someone who will never come home, not knowing that he's the reason why. Narfi's case might represent what happens to werebears who don't have support, who transform in isolation without understanding what they are. The companions at least have structure and control. They know what they are, they choose to transform, they have Kodlak working toward a cure. Narfi has nothing, just a curse he might not even know he has, destroying everything he loves without his conscious knowledge. Next theory. Rorikstead, this peaceful farming village that seems so idyllic on the surface, might be hiding one of the darkest secrets in Skyrim. We're talking about Daedric worship, human sacrifice, and selling souls for agricultural success. First, let's talk about the name and what doesn't add up. The current village leader, Rorik, claims he founded the settlement about 20 years ago. There are sources suggesting Rorikstead was founded in the Second Era, more than 200 years before the events of Skyrim. But here's the problem. Rorikstead is mentioned in historical texts from way before that. The Pocket Guide to the Empire mentions Rorikstead during the time of Tiber Septim. Bards sing songs about Rorik's Hall from centuries ago. How can Rorik have founded a town 20 years ago that already existed hundreds of years before he was born? Unless there are two different Roriksteads, or Rorik is lying, or something much stranger is going on. Some people think there's a time loop, or that Rorik is somehow immortal. But there's another explanation that ties into the rest of the evidence. Let's look at what makes Rorikstead unusual. It's the most fertile farmland in all of Skyrim. The soil there produces crops that shouldn't be possible given Skyrim's climate and location. Every other farm in the Hold struggles with rocky soil, harsh weather, and poor yields. But Rorikstead? Perfect harvests every season. Lemkil, one of the farmers, even comments on how easy farming is there despite being a terrible farmer himself. Juain, an elderly man in town, comments on this unusual fertility. He's lived there a long time and thinks it's strange how well crops grow. Juain seems to be aware something is off about the soil's fertility. The soil here is perfect for farming. Some would say it's more than perfect. Too perfect even. That's suspicious phrasing, too perfect, like it's not natural. Now let's talk about the people. Lemkil is probably the worst father in Skyrim. He openly hates his two young daughters, Sissel and Britta, blaming them for their mother's death in childbirth. Lemkil verbally abuses his daughters constantly, saying things like, "You little brats are going to be the death of me, just like your mother." He works them like slaves and shows zero affection. But nobody in town does anything about it. Nobody intervenes, nobody reports it, nobody helps those girls. In a small farming community where everyone knows everyone, that's weird, unless the town has a reason to tolerate Lemkil's abuse. Sissel is secretly learning magic from Juain. She has natural talent with ice magic and asks Juain to teach her in secret. But here's the thing, Sissel tells you she saw Juan doing something strange in the middle of the night. She says Juan digs in the fields at night. When you ask Juan about it, he gets defensive and brushes it off. What's he doing out there? What's he burying or digging up? Let's talk about Eric the Slayer's background. His real name is Eric, and he's the son of Mistralki, the innkeeper. Eric wants to become an adventurer, but his father forbids it, saying it's too dangerous. That seems normal, until you realize Mistralki's wife, Eric's mother, disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Mistralki doesn't talk about what happened to her. She's just gone, and Eric doesn't seem to know the details either. A mother vanishes in a small town and nobody discusses it. That's another red flag. Then there's the missing residents. Ennis, a young boy in town, mentions his friend Reldith. Ennis plays with Reldith regularly and talks about her, but Reldith doesn't exist. There's no NPC with that name anywhere in Rorikstead or the surrounding area. The game files don't have her. Either this is a developer oversight, or Ennis is talking about someone who used to be there but isn't anymore. Maybe someone who was sacrificed. There's a shrine to Arkai in Rorikstead, which makes sense. Arkai is the god of life and death, but there's something off about how prominent it is for such a small village. Arkai is specifically opposed to necromancy and undeath, which might seem like it contradicts the dark worship theory. Unless the shrine is there as a cover, or as a way to keep Arkai from noticing what's really happening. Or maybe it's a ward, protecting the town from undead while they do something else entirely. Now here's where it gets really dark. There's evidence suggesting Rorikstead might be connected to one or more Daedric princes. The most likely candidates are Clavicus, who makes deals and pacts, or Molag Bal, who is associated with domination and enslavement. The fertility of the land, the mysterious disappearances, the abuse that goes unpunished, it all points to some kind of deal made with a dark power. Think about it. What if Rorik, when he supposedly founded the settlement 20 years ago, actually made a pact with a Daedric prince? The deal: amazing soil fertility and prosperity for the village in exchange for what? Souls. Specifically, the souls of young women. That would explain the missing women, Sissel's mother, Eric's mother, possibly others. Their sacrifices to maintain the bargain. This would explain why Lemkil's abuse is tolerated. Those two girls are potential future sacrifices. The town needs young women to fulfill the pact, so they have to keep producing them even if it means tolerating abuse. Everyone in town knows what's happening, but participates in the collective denial because their survival depends on it. Juan might be the one actually maintaining the pact. He's old enough to have been there before Rorik, and his nighttime digging could be him preparing ritual sites or burying evidence. His teaching magic to Sissel might not be kindness. Maybe he's preparing her for a role in the pact or testing if she has magical ability that could make her a more valuable sacrifice. There's also weird stuff with the names. Rorik is a Nord name, sure, but the original ancient Rorikstead was supposedly built by King Rorik during the First Era. Names repeating across centuries, settlements existing and not existing, time getting weird, that's exactly the kind of thing that happens around Daedric influence. Some people theorize the village is caught in a time loop, sacrificing people every cycle to maintain fertility. Each iteration, someone named Rorik founds the village, they make the Dark Pact, they prosper for a while, something goes wrong, and reality resets. The residents don't remember the previous loops, but the land remembers. That's why the soil is too perfect. It's been fed blood and souls across multiple timelines. Consider the location. Rorikstead is in a valley, surrounded by hills, somewhat isolated from the rest of Skyrim. It's far from any major cities, off the beaten path, perfect place to hide secrets. Perfect place for entire village to participate in dark worship without outside interference. The few travelers who pass through see a normal farming village and never look deeper. What's especially creepy is that if you kill Lemkil, his daughters mourn him. Despite the abuse, despite everything, they're sad he's dead. That could just be trauma bonding, or it could be something darker. Maybe they're magically compelled to love him to ensure they won't run away or rebel against their eventual fate. The game never explicitly confirms any of this, which makes it creepier. There's no quest that exposes Rorikstead's secrets. There's no moment where an NPC breaks down and confesses everything. It's all just little details that don't quite add up, inconsistencies that nag at you if you pay attention. A town that's too successful, people who disappeared without explanation, abuse that goes unpunished, children who see things they shouldn't, and an old man digging in the fields at night. Maybe the darkest part of this theory is that if it's true, the player can't do anything about it. There's no option to expose the conspiracy, to save the potential victims, to break whatever pact was made. You can kill individual NPCs, but that doesn't stop whatever is happening there. The land will still be fertile, the crops will still grow, and maybe, in a few years, another woman will disappear, and the cycle will continue. Rorikstead represents the idea that not every mystery in Skyrim has a resolution. Some places keep their secrets, some darkness stays hidden, and maybe that's more realistic than every conspiracy being uncovered. How many real small towns have dark histories that never come to light? How many communities maintain terrible secrets through collective silence? If you ever go back to Rorikstead after thinking about this theory, you can't unsee it. The perfect fields feel wrong. The cheerful greetings from residents feel fake. Every mention of someone who's not there anymore makes you wonder. And you realize that in Skyrim, a place being peaceful on the surface might just mean whatever horror is happening there is very, very good at hiding. Next theory. What if Grelod the Kind isn't actually cruel? What if the awful treatment of the orphans at Honor Hall Orphanage is actually her attempting to prepare them for Skyrim's brutal reality, toughening them up so they can survive once they leave? Okay, this one is hard to justify, because Grelod seems pretty clearly terrible. When you first meet her, she's verbally abusing children, calling them worthless, threatening them. Her nicknames like Grelod the Kind is clearly sarcastic. But let's try to see this from another angle. Skyrim is dangerous, really dangerous. If you're not prepared for it, you die. Bandits, wild animals, dragons, disease, war, it's a hostile environment even for adults. For children without families, without resources, without training, it's basically a death sentence. The player character survives because they're special, but regular people, most of them don't make it far. What happens to orphans when they leave Honor Hall? They have nothing. No family connections, no inherited property, no trade skills unless they learn some while in the orphanage. They are sent out into a world that doesn't care about them with zero preparation. Most of them would probably end up as beggars, bandits, or dead within the first winter. Maybe Grelod understands this. Maybe she's seen too many orphans leave with hope in their eyes only to hear later they froze to death or got killed by wolves, so she doesn't coddle them. She doesn't lie to them about how the world works. She's harsh, she's demanding, she makes them strong through adversity. It's the old tough love argument that suffering builds character and prepares you for hardship. Look at what she says to them. You ungrateful wretches. Why? If I had my way, you'd all be put to work in the stables where you belong. On the surface, that's abuse. But think about it differently. Working in stables teaches valuable skills. Animal handling, physical labor, responsibility. Those are skills that could get an orphan employment later. Maybe Grelod wishes she could force them to learn practical trades instead of just housing them. The orphans do get fed, sheltered, and kept alive. Grelod doesn't let them starve. She doesn't sell them into slavery, though she theoretically could in Skyrim's questionable legal system. She keeps them until they're old enough to have some chance of survival. That's more than a lot of Skyrim's children get. Think about all the kids living in poverty in cities, begging in the streets while their parents drink or ignore them. Constance Michel, the other woman running the orphanage, is gentle and kind to the children. She believes in compassion and tries to counterbalance Grelod's harshness. But here's the thing. Constance doesn't actually run the orphanage successfully without Grelod. After Grelod dies, Constance takes over and is much nicer to the kids. But she also has no idea how to handle the business side of things, no connections for adoptions, no experience managing an institution. Being nice doesn't put food on the table. Maybe that's the division of labor. Grelod handles the hard stuff, the discipline, the financial management, the tough decisions, while Constance provides emotional support. Together, they might actually represent a balanced approach to raising children in terrible circumstances. But players only see Grelod's harshness without understanding what she's protecting them from. There's also the adoption situation. Grelot does arrange adoptions, and she's clearly frustrated that more children don't get adopted. Why? Why do these wretched orphans still plague me so? Could be read as her being tired of being responsible for them, yes, but it could also be genuine frustration that these kids aren't getting families. Maybe she's harsh because every child that doesn't get adopted is another kid she'll eventually send into the world unprepared. Think about who wants to adopt in Skyrim. The player can adopt kids after completing certain requirements, but regular NPCs, not many people are adopting. There's war, dragons are back, the economy is terrible, nobody wants extra mouths to feed. Grelot has to house and raise children that nobody wants, unlimited resources, knowing most of them have grim futures ahead. That would make anyone bitter and harsh. Now, let's be clear. This theory is really stretching it. Grelot is presented as straightforwardly cruel in the game. She beats the children, one of them explicitly hires the Dark Brotherhood to kill her, and nobody mourns when she dies. The game clearly wants players to see her as a villain. But in a world as dark as Skyrim, where survival is genuinely difficult and most people are one bad day away from death, maybe there's an argument that coddling children does them no favors. The Thieves Guild trains kids to steal. The Companions train kids to fight. Even the College of Winterhold barely provides support to its students. Why should Honor Hall be different? The orphans who survive Grelot's treatment and make it out could theoretically be tougher, more resilient, better prepared for Skyrim's reality than kids who were raised softly. It's horrible to think about, but in a brutal medieval fantasy world, maybe abuse creates survivors. Not because abuse is good, but because the world itself is so terrible that you need to be broken down and hardened to have any chance. Still, this theory is uncomfortable even to discuss because it sounds like justifying child abuse. And honestly, the game doesn't really support this interpretation. Grelot is mean because she's mean, not because she has noble intentions. The theory only works if you ignore most of the context and dialogue and try really hard to find a justification for behavior that probably doesn't have one. But that's the point of theories like this, to look at villains and try to understand what could possibly motivate them. What lens could make their actions make sense? Even if the answer is no, she's just cruel. It's worth examining because real people do justify terrible behavior with these kinds of arguments. I'm doing this for your own good. The world is harsh, so I have to be harsh. This hurts me more than it hurts you. We've all heard those lines. Maybe Grelot represents what happens when someone convinces themselves that cruelty is kindness, that harm is help. Maybe she tells herself she's preparing the children, making them strong, giving them what they need to survive, and maybe she even believes it. But belief doesn't make it true, and good intentions don't excuse bad actions. In the end, this theory falls apart under scrutiny because Grelot is demonstrably making the orphans' lives worse, not better. They're not learning skills, they're being traumatized. They're not being prepared for the world. They're being broken down by someone who has power over them and enjoys using it. And the fact that one of them gets so desperate they hire an assassin to kill her tells you everything you need to know about whether her treatment is helping anyone. But it's worth thinking about because Skyrim is full of moral ambiguity. The game asks you to make difficult choices, to navigate situations where there are no good options. Maybe Grelot is just a reminder that sometimes people are cruel without justification, that not every villain has a sympathetic backstory, and that some harm is just harm without any deeper meaning. The orphans deserve better than Grelot. They deserve better than a world that produces people like Grelot. And maybe that's the real lesson, that Skyrim's harsh world creates harsh people, and breaking that cycle requires more than just survival skills. It requires actual kindness, actual support, actual care. The things Grelot fails to provide and uses toughening them up as an excuse to withhold. Next up, let's look at something that's been making the rounds in lore communities for years now, the idea that goblins might actually be what happened to the Aelids. Yeah, those ancient Heartland elves who built the White Gold Tower and ruled Cyrodiil before getting absolutely wrecked by the Alessian Rebellion. So here's the thing, we know what happened to the Snow Elves, right? The Dwemer basically poisoned them with toxic fungi, blinded them, and over generations they turned into the Falmer. Twisted, hunched creatures that barely resembled their ancestors. It's one of the darkest transformations in the series. But what if something similar happened to the Eyelids? The Eyelids were these powerful sorcerer kings who controlled Cyrodiil during the First Era. They enslaved humans, worshipped Daedric princes, and built these incredible ruins that you can still explore in Oblivion. When the Slave Rebellion happened in the year 243 of the First Era, led by Alessia and supported by the Nordic hero Pelinal Whitestrake, the Eyelid Empire basically collapsed. Most of them were killed or driven out of their homeland. Now, traditional lore tells us that the surviving Eyelids scattered. Some fled to Valenwood and were absorbed into Bosmer society over a couple thousand years. Others went to High Rock and merged with the Direni. Some even tried to go north into Skyrim but got slaughtered by Nords. Within a few centuries, they were basically extinct as a distinct culture. The ruins they left behind are empty, their language mostly forgotten, their people gone. But here's where it gets interesting. In Oblivion, you encounter these goblin tribes all over Cyrodiil. 8 named tribes, each with their own territories, totems, shamans, war chiefs. They have this surprisingly complex social structure for what most people dismiss as just monster enemies. And when you start looking closer at these tribes, some really weird connections start appearing. 3 of the goblin tribes have feathers prominently featured in their imagery. The Rockbiters and Dust Eaters both have feathers on their tribal symbols. And there's literally a tribe called the Three Feathers. Now, why would that matter? Because in the Song of Pelinal, one of the ancient texts about the Alessian rebellion, it specifically mentions that feathers were the markings of the Eilidun. That's what they called themselves. The hidden ones in their own language. Feathers were apparently important to their culture, maybe worn as decorations or used in their ceremonies. So you've got goblins in the exact same region where the Eyelids used to rule, using the same symbolic imagery that the Eyelids used. That's a pretty big coincidence, but there's more to unpack here. The geographic distribution makes sense too. Goblins in Elder Scrolls aren't found everywhere. They're most common in Cyrodiil and the surrounding areas. That was the Eyelid heartland. You find some in Somerset too, where the Altmer apparently used them as soldiers, which makes sense if goblins have some elven ancestry. The Altmer are notorious for their selective breeding programs and rigid social hierarchies, so using devolved elves as cannon fodder would be right up their alley. Think about the timeline. The Eyelid Empire fell in First Era 243. By the time of Oblivion in the late Third Era, that's over 3,000 years of potential degeneration. We've seen with the Falmer that it takes several generations for the transformation to really take hold, but give it centuries, and the changes become extreme. The Falmer went from beautiful snow elves with a civilization that rivaled the Altmer to blind, twisted creatures in about 700 years after taking refuge with the Dwemer. The goblins would have had much longer to devolve. But what would cause that kind of degeneration? With the Falmer, we know it was the toxic fungi the Dwemer forced them to eat. That's explicit in the lore. It was deliberate poisoning that robbed them of their sight and twisted their bodies over generations. For the Eyelids, it might have been different. After the fall of their empire, the surviving Eyelids were scattered, traumatized, and hunted. Most of their great sorcerers were dead. Their connection to their Daedric patrons was severed or weakened. They lost access to the Eyelid wells, those magical structures that powered their civilization. They were forced into hiding in caves and ruins, living like scavengers. Maybe the degeneration was more natural, the result of magical withdrawal, inbreeding in small isolated populations, environmental toxins in the places they were forced to hide, and just the general trauma of losing everything. There's this interesting parallel with how elven races seem particularly susceptible to transformation based on their circumstances. The Oldmer split into all these different mer races: Altmer, Dunmer, Bosmer, Orsimer. The Chimer became the Dunmer through Azura's curse. The Dwemer just vanished completely. The Falmer were transformed by the Dwemer. Elves in this setting seem to be almost malleable, like their forms are more tied to their circumstances and spiritual state than human forms are. And goblins do have some vaguely elvish features if you look past the degeneration. They're roughly the same size as elves, maybe a bit shorter. They walk upright. They have pointed ears, though much larger and more twisted. They're intelligent enough to have complex tribal structures, use tools and weapons, practice shamanic magic. That's way more sophisticated than something like a troll or ogre. They even have their own crude language. In Oblivion, the goblin tribes fight wars with each other over their totems. These totems are magic staffs that each tribe considers sacred. If you steal one tribe's totem and put it in another tribe's lair, they'll go to war. The mechanics are broken in the final game, but the systems are there. That level of cultural complexity suggests something more than just beasts. The Bitterfish tribe in particular is weird. They don't follow the standard goblin tribal structure. They have multiple shamans instead of just one. No war chief, no totem. They are found in Miskarkand, which happens to be one of the largest and most important Aelid ruins. What if the Bitterfish goblins are actually closer to the original Aelids? Maybe they've retained more of their identity by staying in their ancestral ruins, maintaining some fragment of their culture. Now, there are arguments against this theory too. The biggest one is that we never see any transitional forms. There's no lore about Aelids slowly becoming more goblin-like. No accounts of part elf, part goblin creatures. The transformation would have happened gradually, so where's the evidence of that process? But here's the thing. Most of the sources we have about the Alessian period are written by humans who won the war. They had every reason to erase or rewrite Aelid history. Pelino Whitestreak wasn't just killing Aelids in battle, he was carrying out genocide. The Alessian order that came after was extremely anti-elf and spent centuries purging elven influences from human society. If Aelids were becoming goblin-like, would human chroniclers have documented that, or would they have just started calling them goblins and stopped thinking about them as elves? There's also the question of the Valenwood Aelids. In-game texts tell us that several Aelid clans successfully escaped to Valenwood and were welcomed by the Bosmer. But then, they just disappeared. Within 2,000 years, there's no trace of them. The ruins in Valenwood that were once Aelid settlements are completely empty. One scholar proposed the theorem of disheritage, the idea that the forest Aelids became unable to breed with each other and could only have children by mating with Bosmer. That would explain their gradual disappearance as they were absorbed into Bosmer bloodlines. But another theory suggested they just gave up, drinking themselves to death on Bosmer beverages. Both theories are trying to explain the same mystery. Where did they go? What if some of them degenerated into goblins there too? Or maybe the degeneration only happened to the Aelids who stayed in Cyrodiil, isolated in caves and ruins without any other elven populations to interbreed with. The ones who went to Valenwood or High Rock and mixed with other elves would have maintained their mere characteristics. The soul thing is interesting too. In Skyrim, Falmer have white souls like animals, not black souls like sentient races. That's a huge deal. It means that whatever was done to them damaged them on a spiritual level, not just physical. If goblins also have white souls, that would suggest a similar kind of fundamental transformation. The games don't explicitly tell us what kind of souls goblins have, but the fact that you can't capture them in black soul gems suggests they're classified as creatures, not people. There's this broader pattern in Elder Scrolls lore where fallen civilizations leave behind these degraded remnants. The Dwemer disappeared, but their constructs remain. The Falmer became twisted versions of themselves. The Aelids vanished, and goblins appeared in their old territories. It fits the setting's general vibe of ancient glory turning into ruin and degeneration. Some people point out that goblins appear in other provinces too, not just Cyrodiil. But the lore isn't super clear on whether goblins in different regions are the same species or different related species. Maybe goblins as a broad category includes multiple lineages, some that were always goblins, some that are devolved elves, some that have different origins entirely. The Reeklings in Skyrim's Solstheim are considered a type of goblin, but they are clearly different from Cyrodiil goblins. They're smaller, they live in ice, they have different culture. So, goblin might be more like a category than a single species. If that's the case, Cyrodiil goblins, being devolved eyelids, doesn't mean all goblins everywhere came from elves. What makes this theory compelling is that it fits with Elder Scrolls' dark approach to history. This isn't a setting where fallen empires leave behind noble ruins and descendants who remember their heritage. It's a setting where yesterday's gods become tomorrow's demons, where proud races become monsters, where the losers of history are not just defeated, but erased or transformed beyond recognition. The Alessian Rebellion wasn't just a political change, it was a fundamental reordering of Cyrodiil's identity. The humans who won wanted to completely purge elven influence from their new empire. If the surviving eyelids were being hunted down, forced into hiding, losing their magic and culture and breeding population, degeneration into something beast-like would be the ultimate victory for their enemies. They'd go from the master race who enslaved humans to creatures that humans hunt in caves. And maybe that's the real horror of it. Not just that it might have happened, but that nobody remembers or cares. The Eyelids are studied as ancient history. Their ruins are explored for loot. But if their descendants are still there as goblins, they're just seen as monsters to kill. Nobody's trying to cure them or restore them. They're just part of the landscape now. The feathers thing keeps coming back to me though. That's not just coincidence. Game developers don't usually add specific details like that without reason. The fact that goblin tribes in the heart of Eyelid territory use the same symbolism that specifically identified Eyelids, that's deliberate. Whether it's meant to confirm the theory or just hint at it, it's there. So, is the theory proven? No, definitely not. The lore is deliberately ambiguous about this. But the evidence is there if you look for it. Geographic overlap, symbolic connections, the pattern of elven degeneration, the timeline, the mysterious disappearance of the Eyelids. It's one of those Elder Scrolls mysteries where the game gives you enough pieces to put together a picture, but not so many pieces that there's only one possible picture. And honestly, whether it's true or not, it's a perfect example of how dark Elder Scrolls lore can get when you dig into it. This isn't just background flavor, it's potentially the story of an entire civilization's fall from grace, ending not with a bang, but with their descendants becoming the very monsters that adventurers kill without a second thought. That's the kind of tragic irony that Elder Scrolls does better than almost any other fantasy setting. Theory 2, Khajiit forms and the Lunar Lattice. Next, let's get into something that's way more explicitly canon, but still mind-blowing when you really think about it, how Khajiit forms are determined by the moons. This isn't really a theory since it's confirmed lore, but the implications of it are wild, and not everyone knows just how deep this rabbit hole goes. So basic facts first, there are two moons in the Elder Scrolls universe, Masr and Secunda, also called Joan and Jode in Khajiit religion. Masr is the bigger one, Secunda is smaller. They go through phases like our moon does. And here's the thing that makes Khajiit completely unique in fantasy. The phase of these moons, when a Khajiit is born, determines what form they take. Not like astrology, where it affects your personality or whatever. We're talking physical form, body structure, size. Whether you walk on 2 legs or 4. Whether you look like a house cat or a tiger or something in between. All determined by the moons. There are 17 known Khajiit forms, technically 18 if you count the Mane, which is this unique form that can only be born when a third moon appears during a rare alignment. Each form is completely different, but they're all the same species. They can all interbreed. A Khajiit that looks like a normal house cat and a Khajiit that's the size of a horse are the same race, they just were born under different moon phases. Let's break down how it works. Masr, the big moon, determines the overall body structure. When Masr is full, Khajiit are born as large quadrupeds, 4-legged, big. These are your Senche and Sencherat, which look like tigers or lions and can be ridden as mounts. When Masr is waning, you get small quadrupeds, the Ulfik, which literally look like house cats, but are fully intelligent and can speak and cast spells. When Masr is waxing, you get large bipeds like the Cathairat, big upright cat people, and when Masr is new, you get small bipeds like the Suthei. Then Secunda modifies how bestial or humanoid the form is. When Secunda is waxing, Khajiit look less bestial, more humanoid features, more upright posture. When Secunda is waning, they look more bestial, more cat-like features, more feral appearance. When Secunda is full or new, you get the most extreme versions in either direction. So you combine the phases of both moons and you get 16 different forms. The Cathay that you play in most Elder Scrolls games are born when Maser is waxing and Secunda is full, large bipeds with a good balance between cat and human features. They're the most common form you see because those moon phases happen most often. But then you've got the Alfiq, born when Maser is waning and Secunda is full. They look exactly like regular cats. People literally treat them like pets. Imagine being a fully intelligent person, capable of speech and magic, and everyone who doesn't know better just tries to pet you or feed you treats. The lore says Alfiq rarely travel outside elsewhere, specifically because of this disrespect. They're serious mages, but they get reduced to house cats by ignorant people. On the other end, you've got the Sencherat, born when Maser is full and Secunda is waxing. They're massive, the size of large horses, sometimes weighing as much as 50 Altmer. They're used as war mounts. Imagine being born into a body that makes you automatically suited to carry other people around. The social implications are kind of disturbing when you think about it. The Pahmar are tiger-sized quadrupeds born during Maser, Full, and Secunda New. The Dagi are small, monkey-like Khajiit that are supposedly great climbers. The Ohms look so similar to Bosmer that they could pass for wood elves. They have minimal fur, no tail, and basically human proportions. They're born when Maser is new and Secunda is full. The Ohmsrat look like Ohms, but with light fur and a tail, a bit more obviously cat-like, but still very humanoid. The Sufeirat are slightly larger than Sufei, with digitigrade legs. They walk on their toes like cats do. The Catheirat are bulkier than regular Cathay. There are also the Toje and Tojeirat, which aren't well described in lore, and the Pahmarat, which are bigger Pahmar. Then you have the Mane, which is the spiritual leader of all Khajiit. Only one Mane exists at any given time, and they're born when both moons are new and a third moon appears. This third moon thing is mysterious. It's not clear if it's a literal third moon, some kind of magical phenomenon, or a metaphorical description of a rare alignment. But when it happens, the Khajiit born during that time becomes the mane. In old Khajiit tradition, all other Khajiit would shave their manes and braid the hair into the mane's mane. The Mane would carry the hair of all their people, supposedly weighing them down so much they couldn't move on their own and had to be carried on a palanquin. With modern populations, that became impractical, so now it's just the hair from the mane's tribe and warrior guard, which is still hundreds of people. So here's where this gets cosmologically interesting. The Khajiit religion says that the moons maintain something called the Ja Khaje, or lunar lattice. This is supposedly a protective barrier that the moons create through their movement, protecting the mortal plane from the rest of the orbis, the rest of existence. Pre-Ridatta Khajiit myths talk about Daedric princes attacking this lattice and being burned when they touch it. The fact that Khajiit forms are determined by the lunar lattice suggests they're somehow directly connected to the cosmic order in a way other races aren't. It's not just that the moons affect them, they're literally shaped by the moons, like the moons are part of their nature. The Khajiit creation myth says that Azura, who's basically their version of Azura, was told to take some of Nirni's children and change them, making them the fastest, cleverest, and most beautiful of creatures, and that they had to be fashioned as the best climbers, to climb upon the winds of Khenarthi's breath and set Maser and Secunda aright, lest they fail. That last part is key. The Khajiit have a cosmic duty to maintain the moons. They're not just affected by the lunar lattice, they're supposed to protect it. Which raises questions about what would happen if the moon stopped moving properly, or if the lattice failed. Would Khajiit stop being born? Would they all die? Would they be unable to reproduce? Or would their forms become chaotic and unpredictable? There's this whole other layer about how the moons themselves are divine entities. In most Elder Scrolls cosmology, the moons are described as the severed corpse of Lorkhan, the dead god whose body became mortality itself. When the Aedra punished Lorkhan for tricking them into creating the mortal world, they tore him apart and flung his body into the sky, where it became the two moons. So, if Khajiit are shaped by the moons, and the moons are the corpse of Lorkhan, that means Khajiit are literally being shaped by a dead god's body. That's metal as hell. It also connects them to the whole creation myth in a really direct way. They're tied to the same god that created mortality and the mortal plane. The Khajiit themselves have a different take on the moons. They call them Joan and Jode, and in their religion, these are children of Fadomai, their mother goddess. The story goes that Fadomai was dying after giving birth to all the spirits and gods, and she set Joan and Jode in the sky to guide and protect her other children. When Azura, one of Fadomai's daughters, came to her dying mother, Fadomai gave her 3 secrets, one of which was to take some of Nirni's children and transform them into the Khajiit. So you've got this dual origin story. From the outside perspective of humans and elves, the moons are Lorkhan's body, and the Khajiit are just another race affected by mundane forces. From the Khajiit perspective, the moons are divine entities, and the Khajiit were specifically created and blessed by Azura to have this connection. Both can be true in Elder Scrolls lore, because truth is subjective and mythopoeic. Myths create reality as much as describe it. What really blows my mind is thinking about Khajiit family dynamics. Picture this, you're a Khajiit couple and you're going to have a kid. You know that depending on what month they're born in, your child could be anything from a house cat to a tiger to a walking, talking humanoid. You can't control it. You can try to time the pregnancy to get a specific form, but moon phases aren't perfectly predictable and pregnancies don't always go exactly 9 months. So Khajiit parents have to be prepared to raise any form. Your firstborn might be a Cathay like you, walking on 2 legs, speaking clearly, able to wear armor and wield weapons. Your second kid might be an Alfiq who looks like a normal cat but is just as intelligent. Your third might be a Sencherat the size of a horse. And they're all your children, all equally Khajiit, all part of your family. The games don't really explore this much, probably because it's complicated to implement, but imagine the cultural adaptations Kayeti society must have developed to handle this. You need houses that can accommodate tiny Alfiq and massive Sencherat. You need educational systems that work for quadrupeds and bipeds. You need jobs and social roles that different forms can fill. The lore suggests that certain forms naturally gravitate toward certain roles. Alfiq are often mages because they can't physically fight well, and their small size makes them vulnerable, so they develop magic. Sencherat become warriors and mounts. Cathay and Suthay Racht are the most versatile, so they become traders and diplomats and adventurers. Oms can pass as elves, so they're useful for espionage or living in non-Khajiiti cities. But that's gotta create its own problems, right? If your physical form determines your likely career path, that's a kind of biological destiny that must create social tensions. What if you're born as a Sencherat but you want to be a scholar, not a warrior? What if you're an Alfiq who wants to be a warrior but everyone assumes you should be a mage? The games don't explore this, but it seems like it would be a major source of identity struggles. There's also the question of how Khajiit inheritance and nobility works. If a king and queen have a child during the wrong moon phase and that child is born as an Alfiq that looks like a house cat, is that child still the rightful heir, or does form affect succession? The Mane seems to supersede normal royal bloodlines. They're the spiritual leader regardless of which clan they come from, just based on their special birth timing. The more you think about it, the more it seems like Khajiit culture must be radically different from human or elven cultures in ways the games don't fully explore. They can't have the same kind of family resemblance that other races have. A Khajiit child might look nothing like their parents. They can't have beauty standards based on appearance because appearance is random. Their whole social structure has to account for this massive variation. And here's something else. What happens when a Khajiit travels to regions where nobody knows about the different forms? You're an Alfiq traveling through Skyrim. You look like a normal cat, but you're actually an intelligent mage. Do you try to talk to people and freak them out? Do you just accept being treated like a pet? The lore says Alfic rarely leave elsewhere for this exact reason. The disrespect is too much. Or imagine being a Sencherat. You're bigger than a horse, you're intelligent and can speak, but other races keep trying to ride you or use you as a mount. That's got to be degrading. Even if some Sencherat are okay with being mounts for other Khajiit, having non-Khajiit assume you're just an animal would be insulting. The Ohms have the opposite problem. They look so much like Bosmer that people assume they're wood elves. They can pass in other societies easily, but they lose their Khajiit identity in the process. If you're an Ohms who gets raised outside elsewhere, do you even know you're Khajiit? Would you grow up thinking you're just a weird Bosmer? Now, let's talk about the metaphysics of all this. Why are Khajiit affected by the moons in this way when no other race is? The lore doesn't give a complete explanation, but there are hints. The connection to Azura is clearly important. She specifically fashioned them this way. But why? What's the purpose? One interpretation is that the diversity of forms is a survival mechanism. Khajiit can fill almost any ecological or social niche because they have forms suited for everything. Need scouts? Use Dagi, who can climb. Need heavy cavalry? Use Sencherat. Need diplomats who can blend in with elves? Use Ohms. Need mages? Use Alfiq. The Khajiit as a species are incredibly adaptable, but it's through diversification rather than individual flexibility. Another interpretation is more spiritual. The different forms represent different aspects of existence or different ways of experiencing reality. The quadrupedal forms are more connected to nature and instinct. The bipedal forms are more connected to civilization and reason. The smaller forms see the world differently than the larger forms. By having all these forms, Khajiit as a culture have access to a wider range of perspectives and experiences than any other race. There's also the fact that moon sugar, which only grows in elsewhere and is central to Khajiit culture, is supposed to be crystallized moonlight. Khajiit are the only race that can process moon sugar safely. Other races either get high off it or it makes them sick. So there's this direct connection between Khajiit biology and the moons through moon sugar. Moon sugar is used in Khajiit religious ceremonies. It can be refined into skooma, which is a dangerous narcotic, but in its pure form, moon sugar is sacred. Eating it is supposed to help Khajiit connect with the moons and with Azura. There are moon sugar visions, prophecies, spiritual experiences. The whole Khajiit relationship with the divine runs through the moons and through moon sugar. Which raises the question, are Khajiit forms actually determined by the physical moons in the sky or by something more metaphysical? The moons are said to be both physical objects and spiritual entities, both the corpse of Lorkhan and the children of Fadamai. In Elder Scrolls cosmology, the sky isn't outer space like we think of it. The stars and planets are holes into other dimensions, into the planes of the gods. So when Khajiit look at the moons, they're not just seeing big rocks orbiting a planet. They're seeing divine entities, pieces of a dead god, their spiritual protectors, the source of their forms. The phases of the moons aren't just astronomy, they're theology. Time itself in elsewhere is measured by the lunar cycle. The Khajiit calendar is based on the moons. This creates an interesting situation where Khajiit outside elsewhere might have trouble maintaining their connection to their culture and religion. The moons look the same everywhere on Nirn, but the context is different. In elsewhere, everyone knows what the moon phases mean. Expectant mothers track the phases to predict their child's form. Religious leaders consult the moons for guidance. Outside elsewhere, the moons are just moons. A Khajiit living in Skyrim or Cyrodiil is disconnected from that cultural context. There's also the question of what happens during eclipses or other astronomical events. The lore mentions something called the Void Nights that happened before the events of Skyrim, where both moons disappeared from the sky for 2 years. During that time, no Khajiit were born. Not that they were born as weird forms or mutated, they just weren't born at all. Khajiit pregnancies presumably either didn't happen or didn't come to term. After 2 years, the moons came back, and suddenly there was this huge baby boom. The Talmor claimed credit for bringing the moons back, which is why elsewhere joined the Aldmeri Dominion. They were grateful. But the question remains, what actually happened. Were the moons really gone, or was it an illusion? If they were really gone, how? They're supposed to be pieces of a dead god. Can you just make them disappear? And what would happen to existing Khajiit if the moons were permanently destroyed or removed? Would they all die? Would they stop being able to reproduce? Would their forms become unstable, shifting randomly? The moons aren't just important for birds. They're part of what Khajiit are on a metaphysical level. The lunar lattice that supposedly protects Mundus, is that something the moons create automatically, or does it require Khajiit intervention to maintain? The creation myth says Khajiit have to set Maser and Secunda aright, lest they fail. That suggests active maintenance. But what does that actually mean? Are there Khajiit whose job is to magically adjust the moon's orbits? Do they perform rituals to keep the lunar lattice intact? There's so much about Khajiit metaphysics that's hinted at but never fully explained. We know the moons are important. We know Khajiit forms are determined by the moons. We know there's this lunar lattice protecting reality. We know Azura created Khajiit specifically for some cosmic purpose, but the details are murky.